somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's 6 o'clock on Wednesday, the 11th of October. This is Breakfast with Isabel, Webster and Martin Daubney.
Great to be back. And here's what's leading the news this morning. Inside an Israeli border village where entire families were killed, reporters have shown the scene of a massacre where the bodies of men, women, children and even babies have been found, according to the Israeli military. GB News investigative reporter Charlie Peters is in Tel Aviv.
Good morning. Yes, here in Israel, it's an extraordinary situation. Reports coming in overnight of shelling from Syria and indeed more violence in the south. More coming later this morning.
All that as the European Union condemns Israel's blockade of Gaza, saying the denial of food, water and electricity is illegal under international law. Meanwhile,
the Home Secretary ramps up security across the UK to protect Jewish communities from hate crime.
and elsewhere, a glittering start to Sir Keir Starmer's speech as a protester doesn't wobble the opposition leader as he pitches for a decade of Labour in number 10. Catherine Forster, what's in store for the final day?
And Luton Airport flights are suspended until midday following a fire in one of its multi-storey car parks. That's as 5 people are taken to hospital with injuries.
And ITV's This Morning presenter Holly Willoughby has sensationally quit the show after 14 years. It comes as a man's charged with soliciting to commit murder over an alleged plot to kidnap the star.
And of course, Aidan McGibbon has all of your weather.
It's a reversal of fortunes for much of the UK in today's weather. Brighter skies for Scotland, but wetter conditions for Wales and central England. Full details.
And you can get involved in any of our discussions this morning. Do get in touch. Email us gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet
at GBNews.
Well, it remains our top story this morning, day 5 of Israel's war on Hamas. Shocking details are now emerging of a massacre during the terror group's assaults on Israeli communities. Reporters have been shown the scene of a massacre at a village close to the border with Gaza.
And a warning, you may find some of these images disturbing. This is the village of Kfar Azar. It's a kibbutz where the military told reporters men, women and children were shot dead by Hamas gunmen.
Well, the military also told reporters there that entire families had been found dead in their homes, many of whom were babies.
And Israel's bombing campaign on Gaza continued overnight.
More than 200 buildings were destroyed in Gaza, and the United Nations is reporting that 260,000 civilians have been displaced and that entire neighbourhoods have been destroyed. Meanwhile, Hamas has continued to fire rockets into Israel.
And casualty numbers are mounting on both sides of the conflict as Israel put their death toll at 1,200 and the Gaza Health Ministry reported at least 900 of its civilians and citizens have been killed in airstrikes.
Well, Israel's also cut off water, food supplies and electricity into Gaza. After a European meeting last night, the EU foreign policy chief said he opposed the blockade of Gaza.
Israel has the right to defend, but it has to be done accordingly with international law, humanitarian law. And some decisions are counter this international law. The Palestinian Authority is our partner. We don't deal with Hamas, but yes, we support and we deal and we work together with the Palestinian Authority. And not all the Palestinian people are terrorists. So a collective punishment against all Palestinians will be unfair and unproductive.
And the UK and the United States have offered their full support to Israel to contain Hamas. The first plane of ammunition from America has just landed in Israel. And let's speak now to Charlie News, Charlie Peters, even, who's in Tel Aviv. Good morning to you, Charlie. So the front pages in Britain dominated by the aftermath of what the Israeli military are now finding in villages and kibbutzes. But what's the latest overnight? What's been happening?
Well, this is an extremely complex battle space. This war now entering its 5th day, and Israel is fighting off aggressors from several fronts. Last night, overnight, we had shelling coming in now from Syria to add to the shelling that was around from southern Lebanon during the day yesterday. As you've mentioned, rocket attacks continuing also from the Gaza Strip. Many civilian targets were hit yesterday, including the city of Ashkelon, where the Iron Dome air defence system could not stop all of the rockets that were fired over. And as it resists these attacks from several aggressors, the US did fly in advanced armaments last night. This is the first supply plane of weaponry to the IDF since the war started. And US President Joe Biden reaffirmed his support for Israel in a statement last night.
This attack has brought to the surface painful memories and the scars left by a millennia of anti-Semitism and genocide of the Jewish people. So in this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack.
Well, Israel said that the armaments are designed to facilitate what it said are significant military operations and increase preparedness for other scenarios. Well, what are those other scenarios? It seems likely on the ground that in the next 48 hours we could see a ground assault into Gaza. And this comes, of course, as you've mentioned, Martin, a very grave reports coming up from southern Israel in the Gaza envelope, where Hamas terrorists invaded on Saturday morning, and details of the atrocities they have committed in many of the kibbutz and the small communities near to the Gaza Strip are coming to light. As you said, reports of infants and elderly people and women being butchered in what one minister told me last night was an ISIS-style attack. Well, yesterday I spoke with a woman called Danielle who'd fled from her kibbutz on Saturday after the Hamas terrorists assaulted her homeland. Did you see anything in the street when you drove through? Did you see
bodies? And yeah, mostly bodies. Some of them were burned, so we didn't recognize people. Some of them were terrorist bodies. Later on, I found out that I have a few of my friends in the party, in the rave that was arranging at that morning. Some of them were kidnapped, some of them were raped and taken under hostage to the Gaza Strip. It was really horrible.
Well, these actions by Hamas terrorists in Danielle's kibbutz were described as inhuman and as though they were conducted by savages. Now, as Israel receives those armaments from the US and shapes for a likely invasion into the Gaza Strip, you've also heard about that blockade, supplies cut off from Gaza, and the bombardment increasing, closing in on 1,000 dead there. Concerns will, of course, now grow in Gaza that the response to this savagery, described as inhuman, will be severe.
OK, Charlie, thank you very much for that report. And just a reminder, really, that this story is incredibly harrowing when we're talking about the lives of children in all of this. Thank you for now. Let's cross back to Israel and we can speak to Clive Hart, a British man there who's been caught up in the last few days. And Clive, just take us back to the weekend when the sirens started sounding and you first became aware of what was unfolding.
OK, so we live in Sderot, myself and my wife. We actually spent Friday night at my brother-in-law's apartment, also in Sderot. We woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, obviously, when the sirens started, which obviously was really unexpected because there hadn't been any talk in the week of anything going to occur. It was a really, really heavy rocket attack, far more than usual. When we put on the television and the social media, etc., we realised obviously it was part of something much bigger. And obviously Saturday was a crazy day. There was gunfire in Sderot. We later found out that about 20 policemen had been killed in the police station in Sderot. Firemen, civilians, everything. We had the army opposite the apartment searching through fields looking for terrorists, regular bombing attacks. And it's been like that now since, basically since Saturday morning. Literally, I've got to tell you, when I was sat here waiting to come live, I had to jump away from the computer and run into the reinforced room because the sirens went off again and there was another bomb attack. Hopefully we can get through this interview without that happening again, but it's a very live situation.
And Clive, what's your response now? The true horrors are emerging of the scenes, the discoveries in the kibbutzes and the smaller villages. The defence forces on the ground, the Israelis saying this is reminiscent of Nazi slaughters.
I think they're right. Listen, Israel's quite a small country in some ways. It's a bit of a village. Everyone knows someone. So I mentioned about the police station. So my mother-in-law is a civilian worker in the police station. So 20 people that she worked with last week are no longer alive. So, it's everyone. I know personally people that have lost people in the army in the last day or two, young soldiers who were probably caught up on the border when they first came in. It affects everyone directly. It's not something that happens to other people. It's something that happens to you and people you know. Listen, more people have been killed in Israel in the last 3 or 4 days than were killed in the 6-day war, and the 6-day war was against 4 nation states. So I think you have to understand it. Israel's at war as far as we're all concerned. It's not just a skirmish.
You were describing the reinforced rooms a moment ago, and it seems to be, you know, a fact of life for people who live or go on holiday to Israel, that they want these safe rooms, particularly in areas that are sort of close to borders. And yet we've heard these reports in the last few days of people, even inside these reinforced rooms, not being safe. How does that play into the psyche of Jewish people who wanted a state in which they could feel safe?
Well, firstly, just to address your point, I think you're right that the safe rooms, which just to be so you can understand what we mean by a safe room, it's a totally normal room in the apartment. The only two differences between that room and every other room is that outside of the window there's like a heavy metal shutter that you pull closed, and the door is a slightly heavier metal door. Other than that, it's just a normal room. And yeah, listen, I'm sure that over the years, the rockets have become more powerful and more sophisticated. And you're right, it's certainly not a foolproof guarantee of anything, the safe room. It's a safer room. It's not a safe room. So that's just on a technical point. You're absolutely right that people, the state of Israel grew up after the Holocaust, and one of the things the thing that was most important to the Jewish people was having a safe country. And Israel hasn't got a safe country at the minute. And, we're going to have to do everything we can, by all means, to get that back.
OK, well, listen, stay safe. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us, Clive Hart, talking to us from Sderot this morning in Israel. We wish you well and your family as well. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
OK, back in Britain, there are worries the conflict could lead to a rise of anti-Semitism across the UK.
Yeah, Jewish schools are increasing security and communities are supporting one another as they wait to hear if friends and family caught up in the conflict are safe. GBNews reporter Lisa Hartle has more.
There are concerns of a rise in anti-Semitism in the UK since Hamas launched its attack on Israel. Community Security Trust is a charity that arranges security personnel for Jewish schools across the nation. CEO Mark Gardner says security was already extremely tight, but more measures are being put in place.
You have real proper fencing. You have the school built a long way back from the road in case of a car bomb. You have protective film on the windows. You have CCTVs that feed into our own 24/7 control center. You have infrared mechanisms that detect any movement breaking through perimeters. You have guards on the site. But whatever else we can add on top, we will do so. There's certainly an increase in the regularity of police patrols past Jewish schools and past places where Jewish school children wait for buses and come off trains, etc., etc. And there are some schools where there will now be a police presence at opening and closing times.
Since the conflict began this weekend, Jewish communities across London have been supporting each other as people wait to hear for news of their loved ones. Eric Albaz has cousins serving in the Israeli military.
My cousin who sends me regular texts, he said, I'm happy to share my information. He goes, my childhood friend Amit and his brother were killed in Nativ Hassara. The son of our good friend and neighbour was killed as a combat fighter in the battle in Kisuf, where my son is now with his team. A sister of one of my soldiers from Team Oz who was seriously injured in Lebanon. Her husband and little girl were murdered in their home in Kafir, which is a kibbutz in Gaza. So he keeps sending me updates, but it's a true reflection of what's going on firsthand. You do feel on higher alert because there are things that are going on our doorsteps. And a friend of mine who was walking home from synagogue was spat at by just a random person. I myself, when I was walking from synagogue and I was crossing the road, a car opened their window and shouted obscenities about Jews. So it is on our doorstep.
Rabbi Meir Schindler says the Jewish community in North London is feeling helpless.
You know, there's maybe great distance, but in terms of our hearts, we're very close. You know, just simply to find something that we can do, whether it be to donate to a good cause, emergency services, voluntary services there, supplies to soldiers, the reservists who've been called up without any sort of preparation, and just there's not enough food and drink for them, to donate to those causes and to pray. That's really as much as we could do.
With the conflict escalating, more civilians on both sides are losing their lives, whilst communities in the UK pray that their loved ones survive. Lisa Hartle, GB News, London.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer took to the stage yesterday to pitch for power during his speech at the Labour Party conference, and a protester covering the opposition leader with glitter during all that. And didn't he handle that incredibly well?
I thought he
yesterday?
did. He took it in his stride. He was an Extinction Rebellion protester, of course. Unwelcome. Anyway, Starmer promised a decade of renewal under Labour and said he aims to create a Britain that is built to last. Well, joining us now is...
Do not doubt that the fire of change still burns in Britain. The question is whether it lives on inside Labour, and today we show it does. Today we turn the page, answer the question, why Labour? With a plan for a Britain built to last, with higher growth, safer streets, cheap British power in your home, more opportunity in your community, the NHS off its knees, a Britain with its future back.
Well, joining us now is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Good morning to you. Still going strong, Catherine, for last day of conference today. And I understand it's been the best attended Labour conference in recent history. Future Prime Minister in waiting, some people see Sir Keir Starmer as almost making sort of an audacious appeal to Conservative voters who perhaps feel alienated or politically homeless. Do you think that he was persuasive with all of that?
Well, certainly Labour are absolutely delighted with how the speech went down. Honestly, at the beginning, it felt like being at a rock concert. It was that sort of energy. And glitter notwithstanding, I suspect, in fact, although, of course, that could have been very serious and does raise real concerns about the safety of politicians, that ultimately helped him because the audience were even more on side. He responded very well. He was very cool and collected. And also that picture has gone out round the country. Voters who probably didn't know much about him will probably be impressed by his response. But yes, appealing directly to disaffected Conservative voters, saying Labour is here for you, saying that they were the party for working people, giving a message of hope that they say that they can make things better. Their central message, let's get Britain's future back. Quite positive and much punchier than the Tory message last week. Now, today, looking forward this morning, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting will be talking about the NHS. He's basically going to say it's got to reform or die. He is able to say things about the NHS as a Labour politician that the Conservatives simply can't say. He'll say we can't just keep throwing money at it. Radical reform is going to be needed. Also, Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, will be talking about maths, specifically intervention in the early years, getting maths skills up, getting primary teachers, giving them the skills to be able to teach maths properly so that children have these skills for the rest of their lives. So a final morning, but certainly the mood here very, very positive at the moment.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it.
Do you think it's a bit weird having Starmer on the second day rather than the final day?
I don't know why they don't end on the big moment. It's kind of like a lot of the political sort of correspondents and people pack up and go, frankly, after his big speech.
It's like Rod Stewart's been on, and now here's the support act.
No, I know exactly what you mean, but there must be a reason for it. Perhaps it's always been that way. Well, let's take a look at what is in store for the weather. Is it how it is always meant to be? Aidan McGivern with the details now.
Hello, a very good morning to you. It's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's another grey start in the south, but brighter weather finally in the far north, whilst in between areas of rain. Certainly wet conditions through the rush hour across much of Wales, parts of northern England, moving into the Midlands by mid-morning, and then parts of East Anglia as well. To the south, a few light showers after the early mist clears, but mostly dry south of the M4, I suspect. Some brightness coming through and still some warmth, but not as warm as it has been 20 or 21 Celsius. Meanwhile, quite a chilly feel for northern parts of the country. Northern Ireland, Scotland, yes, there'll be some blue skies out there, but there'll also be a cold wind blowing from the north, reaching gale force around exposed coast of northern Scotland and bringing in quite a number of showers across northern and western Scotland in particular. They'll continue into the evening and overnight, but mostly restricted to coastal parts. Inland, plenty of clear skies and a chilly start tomorrow with temperatures in the mid-single figures, perhaps low single figures in some sheltered spots. Further south, we've got a lot of cloud. We've got further outbreaks of rain, again, running along the M4 corridor, but some outbreaks of rain further south than that. Clearing finally around the middle of the morning from East Anglia and the southeast. Staying fairly damp and drizzly as well as overcast for the southern counties of England, but further north actually plenty of sunshine on Thursday, feeling fresh with temperatures of 13 to 15 Celsius.
Still to come, ITV's presenter Holly Willoughby sensationally quit this morning yesterday, so we'll be asking what's next in store for the star.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GBNews.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamonn.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 6:25. Welcome to Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Martin.
And we're turning our attention to Luton Airport now because flights have had to be suspended there after a large fire engulfed the multi-storey car park overnight. 5 people having to be taken to hospital, including a number of firefighters.
And Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Service declared a major incident, and passengers have been asked not to travel to the airport if at all possible.
I'm pleased to say we can speak now to travel expert Simon Calder, who joins us from Luton Airport itself. What's the scene like there this morning, Simon? And are you able to shed any light? Steve's been in touch on email saying, was this fire linked in any way to an electric car or an electric battery? I don't know if we're able to sort of determine the cause at this stage.
That's certainly a story which is gaining currency among the many people I'm speaking to here, but I haven't got any evidence of that so far. I'm here in the main area. I'm not being allowed into the terminal, which is behind me, but I have been in and just had a quick look. Hundreds of people there. They have been stuck overnight because once the fire was put out, and very dramatic pictures. I'm just looking across to where that took place. All the flames are now out. Obviously, a very large presence from firefighters. Access roads blocked up. And very eerie scenes here, actually, because normally you would expect flights to be taking off every couple of minutes. I calculate 170 flights will be affected by the cancellations this morning. Nothing going until at least 12 noon. And of course, they can't simply switch on the airport just like that. The security staff have to get here. The crew have to get here. At the moment, nothing going in or out of the airport. Yes, the problem for passengers is massive. This is, of course, a really important base for EasyJet, whose headquarters are just over to my right. It's very important for Ryanair and for Wizz Air, serving lots of destinations in Eastern Europe. And normally, well, there would be 10,000 or so people just here to catch the first wave of flights. Hundreds of people sleeping in the airport overnight, but that was because they were effectively stuck here. 10 flights due to go out. People sitting on board the aircraft. Eventually, they were told, you're not going anywhere. Good luck finding a hotel. And of course, that has proved pretty impossible for them. So they've been sleeping on the floor overnight. And then, my goodness, diversions, 23 of them last night. And people ended up as far away as Bristol, Cardiff, Liverpool and Manchester very late at night. Difficult for them to get home. And, well, 25,000 people at least affected by cancellations today.
Gosh. OK, Simon, thanks very much indeed for that. And I suppose a lot of people not only being diverted away from Luton, but then wondering if their car that they've left in the car park was burnt in all of that. East of England Ambulance Service this morning confirming 4 of their firefighters and 1 member of airport staff had to be taken to hospital in relation to this, and that 1 patient was discharged at the scene. They say the critical incident at Luton Airport has been stood down. We'll keep a close eye on developments there. And as we were hearing from Simon, 170 flights cancelled so far from busy little airport, Luton.
Yeah, and I think that electric vehicle theory will gather a pace because these things seem to be happening more and more, don't they?
Well, we have to get to the bottom of that. Let's turn our attention now to another big story that was doing the rounds yesterday evening. The presenter, Holly Willoughby, has sensationally quit this morning after 14 years on the ITV show. This all follows on from a man being charged with soliciting to commit murder over an alleged plot to kidnap the star.
The mother of 3 took to the social media site Instagram to express her sorrow over leaving the show, but says the difficult decision has been made for her and her family.
Well, let's speak to showbiz reporter Ellie Phillips. And breakfast regular, good morning to you, Ellie. Was the writing on the wall with all of this? There was a sort of feeling post-Phil that, you know, what did the future look like for Holly on the show? Obviously, this alleged kidnap plot, very, very difficult personally for her. But was it also an opportunity to perhaps break away?
Yeah, I think this was the final straw. I think for a year now, it's been... We had this kind of king and queen of daytime, and then I think Q-gate with the Queen lying in state when they allegedly, you know, skipped the queue. They said it was for journalistic, you know, reasons. That kind of kicked off the kind of unwinding of their status. And then obviously there were rumours at the beginning of the year that they personally had fallen out. He left the show 5 months ago under this, you know, unwise but not illegal affair with a younger male colleague. And all of that has kind of put a very negative spin surrounding the show. But since then, it's been 5 months. She's been on screen, she's been off screen, she's had breaks, she's come back, she's had this kind of like whirlwind of different presenters kind of rotating next to her. And she was apparently adamant that she was going to go back, host it solo, move forward. All of their branding around it was very much this female solo host with these rotating reporters. However, behind the scenes, it's reported that she's not found it as easy as she thought she was going to. It's been quite difficult without Phil there by her side. They did have a very, very strong partnership on screen, and I don't think she's particularly gelled with anyone on screen since. There's been so many different ones there. And then with this happening last week, which is absolutely shocking, and no one should have to deal with that, I think it's been the final straw for her, absolutely.
Makes you wonder, Ellie, rather like Top Gear, has the show just run out of legs now? Has it run out of road? Do you think that the whole brand now is tainted this morning, and really this might be a time to call it a day for the entire show?
I actually said when Philip Schofield left that I didn't think Holly should go back at that point. I thought, you know what, time is time. It's been 14 years. Why not step away, clean break, fresh start for everyone involved? She is a very talented solo presenter anyway. She does things on her own. And the interesting thing about this is she stepped away from This Morning, but not ITV. So she obviously does Dancing on Ice. She also does bits for the BBC. She did a show called The Games. So I think moving forward, we're not going to not see Holly Willoughby on screen again. It's just not going to be part of This Morning. But the question is now, what do they do moving forward? Because reports had said that as of January, there were plans behind the scenes to relaunch the show again with her at the helm with a permanent male co-host. And Ben Shepherd's name was up there. Craig Doyle was up there. He's done very, very well alongside her. I think he's been the most successful of all the people she's been partnered with. But now what do? They have no strong female lead. They have no Philip Schofield. They have no Holly Willoughby. What is the plan moving forward?
Well, there was a show before Holly Willoughby, believe it or not. Eamonn has always said the show was bigger than the people involved, and that he believed that the show would go on even if she did step away. It'll be interesting to see, but she'll certainly be fine, won't she? She's got plenty of other things to fall back on.
I mean, she has a lot of things going on. She's got Wild Moon, her brand. She's got all sorts.
Right. Ellie, lovely to see you. Thank you.
OK, still to come, we'll be finding out how to avoid a romance scam. That's next on Headline Makers.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 6:34. This is Breakfast on GB News with Martin and Isabel. And a reminder of our top stories this morning.
We go inside an Israeli border village where entire families were killed. Reporters have been shown the scene of a massacre, which will be distressing to many. The bodies of men, women and children, including babies, were found. This is according to the Israeli military. And our GB News investigative reporter, Charlie Peters, is giving us updates throughout the morning from Tel Aviv.
And that's as the European Union condemns Israel's blockade of Gaza, saying the denial of food, water and electricity is illegal under international law.
Meanwhile, the Home Secretary is ramping up security across the UK to protect Jewish communities from hate crime.
And elsewhere, a glittering star to Sir Keir Starmer's speech. A protester doesn't wobble the opposition leader as he pitches for a decade of Labour in number 10.
Well, it's our favourite part of the programme. It's the Headline Makers, when we go through the newspapers and the things that are going viral online. And we're joined to do that this morning with the journalist and broadcaster Andy Jones and the former editor of the Daily Star, regular columnist and appearer on this channel, Dawn Meeks. And welcome to both of you. Good morning. And unsurprisingly, we start with, day 5 now of harrowing details coming out of this Israel-Hamas conflict, Andy, and well, just reflections really. And I think, to be honest, that the headline for everyone is these babies and the reports of so many children being killed at this particular kibbutz.
The death tolls are rapidly approaching 1,000. The news has been absolutely full of parents desperate for news of children, young 20-somethings kidnapped at the music event out in the desert on the Gaza border. They believe 260 revellers were murdered there. Many were hiding in trees or trying to literally bury themselves in the desert to hide, with the sorts of children being having their throats cut in their beds at another kibbutz, where I think another 100 bodies have been found by Israeli forces that are reaching the area. This was not a political act by Hamas. This was not a military act by Hamas. This was a pure act of terror. This was not military objectives. This was killing people who had no defence, who had done nothing to them. And we've seen the position now of Israel. You know, I know Charlie's been talking in detail about the military strikes. Biden has said that Joe Biden, President of America, said we stand with Israel and they will make sure Israel has everything that it needs.
It's interesting how the Israeli Defence Force comments in there saying this is not a war now, this is genocide. And one of the colonels, Colonel Richard Hecht, said this is like ISIS and reminiscent of Nazi slaughters. Now, that historical echo, particularly chilling.
Of course it is. And I've got a friend in North London, a Jewish, and her little boy. They don't actually support the State of Israel in any way, shape or form, but they happen to be Jewish. And her little boy now, he's 10, and he is terrified to go to school. And I think, you know, that's compared to what is going on and the horrors that is going on, you know, that's a small thing. But it's not a small thing, because this is, you know, Jewish people aren't the State of Israel. Palestinian people aren't Hamas. They're ordinary people. They all want peace. Nobody wants to see children murdered in their beds. And this is what's happening now on both sides, and it's utterly, utterly heartbreaking. I work with a lot of women's groups who support women, in particular in the Middle East. And women in Palestine are now, they're the ones really suffering. Isabel in particular, they are really suffering. And they don't want this. They don't support Hamas. You know, 70% of people in Palestine have never voted. They certainly haven't voted for Hamas.
I mean, they haven't had an election in Palestine since 2006. Hamas have been in charge as almost as a dictator since then. They have incredibly oppressive modesty laws on women, the typical sort of things you see in sort of the caliphate we've seen in ISIS. And Palestinians will be victims.
You know, and this is just pure terrorism. There is nothing more to it than that. And anyone supporting what these people have done is horrific. And what they want, they don't want a peaceful two-state solution. They don't want Israel to exist. They want the same as our ISIS one and as our, the Taliban in Afghanistan one. They want one religion, one ruler, and that's it, across the world. That you can't negotiate with people like that.
And they've set back any negotiations, haven't they, and hurt their own cause in so many ways. But, you know, Israel is angry, legitimately, incredibly angry, because it exists for a safe place for Jewish to live, and they do not feel safe right now. And yet there are questions, legitimate questions from the United Nations, from the President of America, about proportionality now and what to do with the many innocents, the women, the children who are in Gaza, arguably being used as human shields, but also having nowhere to go whilst these retaliatory raids and shells are taking place. And discussions now, and calls from aid agencies as well, for a humanitarian corridor to open urgently. Do you think that those are the sorts of discussions that we're going to see more of as we see these ground troops amassing on the border?
You know what, Isabel? These are the discussions we should have been having a long time ago. This isn't about Saturday. This has been about what's going on in this region for decades now. You know, thousands of people have died over the years, probably millions by now, and we don't seem to have done anything to tackle this situation. And it's heartbreaking. And, you know, the papers today representing, you know, the horror stories about people just not waking up on a Saturday morning, an ordinary Saturday morning, and being murdered in their beds. And just horrific.
Quickly before we move on, Andy, what do you make of the protests or even celebrations, as Nigel Farage called them, in Britain in the aftermath of what happened in France, for example? They've been sending in riot police to shut these pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas, as they called them, protests down. And we've seen this rise in anti-Semitic attacks in Britain. What do you think about the consequences on the streets for Brits of this?
Well, there aren't any consequences, are there? Unless you're somebody who, just Dawn was saying, her friend who's scared to go into school, that's a consequence. There's no consequence for driving around central London or indeed other cities of the world, Sydney, etc., honking your horn, waving Palestinian flags and treating this as a moment of celebration. There is a room for fair and sensible protest, and sometimes protest is loud, but honking your horn, screaming anti-Semitic songs, that's a hate crime. And I don't understand why this is prosecuted. We saw the horrible pictures of those two idiots at a football match holding pictures of that young boy who died of cancer to taunt opposition fans. They were charged with a hate crime straight away. I don't really see how cheering the deaths of thousands of people is not a hate crime.
Well, supporting Hamas in this country is illegal. It's a prescribed terrorist organisation. You can end up in jail for 14 years. But it's that line, isn't it, between whether you're coming out trying to show solidarity with people in Palestine, or if you are showing support for Hamas or celebrating what has happened in Israel. And it, frankly, is hugely traumatising for the Jewish community.
And I do think what Suella Braverman...
inappropriate, many people would say.
Absolutely. And I do think what Suella Braverman has said today about the potentially banning the Palestine flag, I think that's the dangerous ground to be on because it's causing more division.
OK. And the thing is, you know, like I say, in France, they're treating this seriously. I think we've got some live shots actually now, look, just come up. This is of Gaza. There's been shelling throughout the night. It's been reported in the early hours. It's continued into daylight there.
Yeah, absolutely. The sun has risen, but you can't actually see the sky through all the thick smoke if you're listening on the radio, and you can just see plumes of smoke from multiple locations, and this is the ongoing onslaught of retaliatory shells and bombs going into Gaza. The IDF always holding their hands up and letting people know when they will happen. But we're going to move on because we need to talk about some of the other stories making the news this morning, and then we will be speaking in just a few moments to the Secretary of State for Defence. Should we talk about Holly Willoughby? It seems a bit of a gear change, but funnily enough, my aunt, who you know, she's sort of quite a sensible, serious person, only ever texts me as a news anchor when there's a Phil or Holly scandal. And yesterday I get a message going, "What's the latest? Why is she left?" It is. So people are talking about it.
But you know what? I think there's also a distraction thing going on here. You can't cope with the horrors of what's going on in the Middle East at the moment. So something that is distracting, as in Holly Willoughby. And I can't quite get my head round the fact that it was announced live from Israel, by the way. But yeah, she's quit because obviously the kidnap threat to her family. She feels she can no longer have a high-profile position on TV and take her children to school.
Difficult. OK, Dawn. And Andy, we'll have more from you, hopefully, after this. We're going to take a quick break, and after that, we're talking to the Defence Secretary.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back at 6:46. We can speak now to the Secretary of State for Defence, Grant Shapps, who joins us this morning from Brussels. Good morning to you. Good to see you. I want to start by talking about day 5 on this, what is just an ongoing nightmare, frankly, Israel-Hamas conflict, and the reports that we're hearing of possibly up to 40 babies having been involved in a massacre at a kibbutz on the border with Gaza. Just your reflections on that, first of all, this morning.
Morning. Well, it's just horrendous, isn't it? I mean, reports of babies being butchered, the festival goes, as we heard the other day, being slaughtered, even a Holocaust survivor being murdered. And this isn't just militants or gunmen, as I'm seeing it described in some places. You know, call it what it is. This is pure and simple terrorism from Hamas, a prescribed organization, illegal, in other words, in this country, who have gone out of their way to cause mayhem and murder in Israel, and we stand full square behind Israel and the Israelis at this time.
Like in terms of support from the UK, we can see the troops amassing on the border with Gaza. We think that there might be a ground offensive from Israel into there. I mean, what sort of support are they asking for, and what are we providing at this point?
Well, I've spoken to Israeli ministers over the last day or two, and they're obviously, first of all, the first thing says Israel has the perfect right to defend itself against this kind of terrorism. We think that the death toll is about 1,200, many thousands more injured, and the attack was clearly absolutely barbaric in nature. So they have an absolute right to defend themselves. We have asked them to ask us when they need anything specific. Those conversations are ongoing. But I think that the main thing that they need is understanding and support from the rest of the world right now, because what happened was unprecedented and, frankly, pure evil.
Yeah, and no one could disagree with that. There have been, though, 900 deaths on the Palestinian side, and we heard from the President of the United States, who echoed your sentiments there of full square support for Israel. But the diplomatic language from him, very carefully spoken, about concerns about international law, reports of civilians being used as human shields. And there has to be a line, doesn't there, in terms of what sort of action we condone as the West, in terms of how that will affect women, children, people who didn't choose or have nothing to do with Hamas. And there are calls as well for a humanitarian corridor. I mean, how concerned are you about the involvement of Palestinians, civilians in all of this?
Well, the first thing says, I don't believe that Hamas represent the Palestinian people and Hamas behaviour. And we talked about these reports coming out of babies being butchered, bodies being beheaded. That has no place in the 21st century. That is at a different and completely different moral scale to a country defending itself, actually typically trying to give notice before, for example, a building is hit, what they call knock and drop, so there's actually opportunity for people to get out. That is completely different to what these terrorists and Hamas are doing. But the responsibility lies fairly and squarely with Hamas in a situation like this. And I don't think there should be any question of trying to make sort of moral equivalence between Israel trying to defend itself and the way that Hamas have gone around butchering people and almost reveling in in murdering festival goers, for example. I think these are two very different things.
OK, Mr Shapps, you're in Brussels, and Joseph Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, has said that while he agrees with you and Rishi Sunak that Israel has the right to defend itself, it has to be done according to the rights of international law and humanitarian law. And specifically there, he's referring to the concept of cutting off the electricity and the water to Gaza. Is that the right thing to do? Because you are then effectively putting an entire country, including innocent bystanders, under siege.
Well, first of all, as I said before, we support Israel's right to defend itself. I think that's the first principle. Secondly, these are very early days, in as much as the border has only just been resealed, I think, in the last 24 hours or so. So, Israel will have needed to have taken some steps in order to seal that border. Of course, everyone needs to act within international law, but I just go back to Hamas and the way that they have behaved and the fact that none of this would be happening had they not broken out and murdered indiscriminately men, women and children. And we're not just talking about the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, the army, in other words. We're talking about civilians being deliberately targeted and attacked, and I'm confident that Israel will not be involved in doing that kind of thing.
Can I ask you your reaction? I mean, we heard the Foreign Secretary urging Palestinian supporters not to come out, or at least to think twice about going out and protesting on British streets. And we saw the Israeli embassy having to be boarded up, and there were serious concerns about, tensions on the streets of London. I know you're a Jewish man yourself. What's your own reaction to seeing those sorts of scenes in the UK?
Well, I think the government wants to do, or the British government wants to do all it can to reassure, in particular, the communities in Britain, Jewish community, obviously, that the police will take a zero-tolerance approach to this. The Home Secretary has been very strong on this subject. And, generally, I have to say, communities, by and large, get on very well in Britain. It's one of the unique features of, or impressive features of British communal life. And we want it to stay that way. And so we don't want people to be going out and doing things which are blatantly inflammatory. But worse still, remember that Hamas itself is a proscribed terrorist organization in Britain. Now, that means that supporting that terrorist organization can land you in serious trouble, including many years in jail. So we don't want people to sort of misunderstand and think that that is okay when it is not in Britain. But of course, as ever, we are the home of free speech, but it should be done in a respectful way. And that is what we expect of all communities.
Well, Mr Shapps, you could definitely argue that it hasn't been done in a respectful way in the United Kingdom. The glorification of what Hamas did has been rife on the streets of London. We have Jewish school children afraid to wear their blazers to school. We have businesses being stoved in. We have anti-Semitic graffiti emerging across the country. Last week, Suella Braverman was saying multiculturalism isn't working in the UK. Are these types of conflicts bringing that into view? We have imported problems on domestic soil. And in France, the cops are going in and they're stopping these protests in their tracks. Why don't we do the same in the UK?
Well, I actually, at the COBRA, the emergency meeting on Monday at the government, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, was there, and she was very clear, with the police also represented there, that there should be a zero-tolerance approach to this. Now, obviously, the police can't help it when somebody breaks a window, but they can make sure that they go after and prosecute the persecutors of those sort of activities. And that is what we expect to see happen. People should know that they cannot go around and do those things. And it can't intimidate other people, intimidate other communities. There's always that fine line between free speech, the ability to say what you think, and things which step over that line and start to intimidate other communities. And the British government is firmly on the side of keeping this civil, asking the police to do their bit, and we'll continue to maintain that. And I have to say, as you mentioned, I happen to be Jewish, as well as our Defence Secretary, and I can tell you that the Jewish community has taken a great deal of solace from, for example, the Prime Minister attending a synagogue, expressing his deep condolences, and also making clear from the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, the Home Secretary, myself as Defence Secretary, that our number one priority is to ensure that communities at home do feel safe and make sure that the police do have the powers that they need to follow up.
Well, the Prime Minister taking a very strong position on that, and indeed on another ongoing conflict that's going on between Ukraine and Russia. And that brings me to the reason you are in Brussels this morning, and you want to unveil a big announcement this morning in terms of further British support.
Yeah, that's right. We have a package which is another £100 million, which is sort of British-led support, and that is in particular to deal with the mines, because Ukraine is now the most mined country in the world. I'm talking about all those mines that have been laid down by Putin's troops, and other money as well to deal with anti-aircraft and missile intrusions, and about another £70 million there. But as you say, I'm actually in Brussels today to meet with about 50 countries, all of whom sit full square behind Ukraine. And one of the things that we're very determined to do today is ensure that, notwithstanding problems elsewhere in the world, and of course this terrorism, this horrific terrorism in Israel, we will not lose sight of and will not be forgetting what is happening right here in Europe. And it would be a massive mistake for Putin to imagine for one moment that the world's attention is in any way distracted, and that should somehow give him a free hand. So we're here, not just, as it were, in spirit, meeting each other, but also putting money into the fight to make sure that Putin cannot win this war.
Really quickly, I just want to ask you about Sir Keir Starmer's speech yesterday at the Labour Party conference, making an audacious appeal to blue wall voters, calling for anyone who might feel that the Tories don't work for them anymore. How much of a threat do you think the Labour Party is to some of those people who may be feeling a little bit alienated in recent months and years?
Well, I'm afraid because I was dealing with the situation both in Israel and Ukraine, I didn't get a chance to watch his speech. But what I can say is that when it comes to, I hear there was a bit in there about housing. I used to be a housing minister, and I well remember the number of homes built under the last Labour government dropped to the lowest level since 1924. So their record was pretty appalling on that sort of thing. What I heard of the speech, it sounded like it was more glitter and glitz than substance.
OK. Secretary of State for Defence, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Brussels this morning.
OK, and here is Aidan McGivern with your weather. That's next.
Hello, a very good morning to you. It's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's another grey start in the south, but brighter weather finally in the far north, whilst in between areas of rain. Certainly wet conditions through the rush hour across much of Wales, parts of northern England, moving into the Midlands by mid-morning, and then parts of East Anglia as well. To the south, a few light showers after the early mist clears, but mostly dry south of the M4, I suspect. Some brightness coming through, and still some warmth, but not as warm as it has been, 20 or 21 Celsius. Meanwhile, quite a chilly feel for northern parts of the country. Northern Ireland, Scotland, yes, there'll be some blue skies out there, but there'll also be a cold wind blowing from the north, reaching gale force around exposed coast of northern Scotland and bringing in quite a number of showers across northern and western Scotland in particular. They'll continue into the evening and overnight, but mostly restricted to coastal parts. Inland, plenty of clear skies and a chilly start tomorrow with temperatures in the mid-single figures, perhaps low single figures in some sheltered spots. Further south, we've got a lot of cloud. We've got further outbreaks of rain, again, running along the M4 corridor, but some outbreaks of rain further south than that. Clearing finally around the middle of the morning from East Anglia and the southeast. Staying fairly damp and drizzly as well as overcast for the southern counties of England, but further north, actually plenty of sunshine on Thursday. Feeling fresh with temperatures of 13 to 15 Celsius.
Good morning. It's 7 o'clock on Wednesday, the 11th of October. This is Breakfast with Isabel, Webster and myself, Martin Daubney.
And here's what's leading the news this morning. Inside an Israeli border village where entire families were killed. Reporters are showing the scene of a massacre where the bodies of men, women and many children, including babies, have been found, as according to Israeli military. GB News investigative reporter Charlie Peters is in Tel Aviv for us.
In the last hour, more Israeli airstrikes into Gaza, and the response from Hamas terrorists has started this morning with rockets fired back into Israeli territory.
And earlier we spoke to Defence Secretary Grant Shapps.
Hamas behaviour, and we talked about these reports coming out of babies being butchered, bodies being beheaded. That has no place in the 21st century. That is at a different and completely different moral scale to a country defending itself.
Well, that's as the European Union is condemning Israel's blockade of Gaza, saying the denial of food, water and electricity is illegal under international law.
And meanwhile, the Home Secretary ramps up security across the UK to protect Jewish communities from hate crimes.
Elsewhere, it was a glittering start to Sir Keir Starmer's speech as a protester tried to put him off his stride, but he didn't wobble as he pitched for a decade of Labour in number 10. Catherine Forster, what's in store for the final day?
Yes, Labour delighted with how Sir Keir Starmer's speech went down yesterday, glitter notwithstanding. Today, it's the turn of the Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, and the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, saying that the NHS must reform radically to survive.
And Luton Airport flights are suspended until midday following a fire in one of its multi-storey car parks. That's as 5 people are taken to hospital with injuries.
And ITV's This Morning presenter Holly Willoughby sensationally quit the show after 14 years. It comes as a man's been charged with soliciting to commit murder over an alleged plot to kidnap the star.
And Aidan McGivern has your weather.
It's a reversal of fortunes for much of the UK in today's weather. Brighter skies for Scotland, but wetter conditions for Wales and central England. Full details in the forecast.
As always, we love to hear from you. Please do get in touch, be part of the conversation. Email us, gbnews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
On day 5 of Israel's war on Hamas, shocking details have emerged of a massacre during the terror group's assault on Israeli communities. Reporters have been shown the scene of a massacre at a village close to Gaza.
Well, as a warning, you may find these images disturbing. We're showing you now the village of Kfar Aza. It's a kibbutz where the military told reporters men, women and children, including many babies, had been killed by Hamas gunmen.
The military told reporters that entire families were found dead in their homes, including babies.
Well, Israel's bombing campaign on Gaza has continued this morning, and Hamas have also been firing rockets into Israel.
More than 200 buildings were destroyed overnight. The United Nations reports 260,000 civilians have now been displaced and the entire neighbourhoods have been destroyed. Meanwhile, Hamas has continued to fire rockets into Israel.
Well, casualty numbers are mounting on both sides as Israel puts their death toll at 1,200, and the Gaza Health Ministry has reported at least 900 have been killed in airstrikes.
And Israel has also cut off water, food supplies and electricity into Gaza. After a European meeting last night, the EU foreign policy chief said he opposed the blockade of Gaza.
Israel has the right to defend, but it has to be done accordingly with international law, humanitarian law. And some decisions are counter this international law. The Palestinian Authority is our partner. We don't deal with Hamas, but yes, we support and we deal and we work together with the Palestinian Authority. And not all the Palestinian people are terrorists. So a collective punishment against all Palestinians will be unfair and unproductive.
Well, the UK and the United States have offered their full support to Israel to contain Hamas, the first plane load of ammunition from America having just landed in Israel. And we can cross to there and speak to GB News' Charlie Peters, who joins us from Tel Aviv. Good morning to you, Charlie. We've just in the last few minutes been speaking to the Defence Secretary, who condemned the killing of babies and children, describing it as on a whole nother level and having no place in the 21st century.
Yes, and reports of those atrocities from southern Israel floating up to the central and northern regions where we are in Tel Aviv as people fled their kibbutzes and sought refuge in hotels and the homes of friends in the city and the surrounding area. Fighter jets have been flying over our location here consistently overnight as they make their way down to Gaza, where there has been a major bombing campaign overnight. As you said, 200 buildings targeted. The IDF said this morning that they had struck at Hamas air detection capabilities, radars that allow them to track aircraft entering in the airspace and targeting them from the East Mediterranean. Now, as Hamas wakes up from the shelter that they have taken overnight, they are also restarting their own aerial campaign. Rockets fired into areas east of the Gaza Strip this morning. The air raid sirens were heard in Sderot, and there are reports in the last 20 minutes that one of the rockets did make a direct impact on that town. Now, this town has endured so much already in the last 5 days. Many of the atrocities being reported were committed there. It's just a few kilometres away from the border with Gaza, which was breached so successfully by Hamas terrorists early on Saturday morning. And as this conflict escalates, as we've also heard, there is this question of American involvement. Advanced munitions arriving last night from the US to a southern Israeli airport, and the US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said last night that as this bombardment increases and US weapons are involved, they are focused on the safe passage of Palestinians out of Gaza, possibly into Egypt. They said they are focused on this question. With regards to American troops, he said there will be no boots on the ground, but intelligence support to Israel would continue.
Okay, Charlie Peters from Tel Aviv, thank you. And it's just breaking news now. The Israeli Air Force has just announced it's attacked over 80 sites in Gaza overnight, including 2 bank branches used by Hamas to fund terrorism in Gaza, and also an area used to detect aircraft over the Gaza Strip. So significant action overnight.
Well, let's speak to the award-winning investigative journalist now, Inna Lazareva, who's based in Tel Aviv. Good morning to you, Inna. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about the latest lines that we're hearing this morning, continued strikes on both sides. Bring us up to date.
Yes, it's absolutely devastating. In Israel, of course, the airstrikes are continuing, and the rockets are continuing to be fired into southern part of Israel, as you heard from your correspondent. A direct strike on a house in Sderot. On the Palestinian side in Gaza, Israel stopped the supply of water yesterday. There is no electricity. Food stocks are estimated to last only 8 to 10 days more. There's hardly any power. Diesel is supposed to run out any minute. Yesterday, there was an attempt by Egypt to bring in some supplies via the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt. This was bombed by Israel yesterday as well. The situation is very dire. At the same time, on the Israeli side, we're getting more and more devastating news, as we have been since Saturday morning, about atrocities committed, mass murders of infants, children. And of course, one of the biggest issues is the number of hostages being held. About 150 people at least who have been taken into Gaza. And these are not just Israeli nationals, there are quite a few foreign nationals amongst them as well.
Have been actually working with families to try and help them trace loved ones. And I've just been reading overnight as well that Americans are sending in hostage experts to try and help with that search as well.
Yes, that's right. It's a very, very painful situation for any country. Israel in particular has a specific policy where they leave no man, woman or child behind. So in previous situations, for one Israeli soldier that had been kidnapped, there were approximately 1,000 Palestinians, more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners that Israel released in exchange. So if there are 150 people or more, you can imagine the calculus is quite devastating.
So what has your work specifically been dealing with families in trying to trace them? And obviously an agonising wait for news. So many people unsure if loved ones are alive or dead, if they're being held in Gaza or what their condition is. I mean, tell us the stories of the people that you've been speaking to.
Yes, I was at the Missing Person Center close to Ben Gurion Airport, Israel's main airport. The center was just set up in recent days, and throughout the days, families just streaming in. They look haggard, like they haven't been sleeping for many nights on end. They're arriving clutching bags belonging to the missing people with objects that may have DNA traces on them, so that these can be matched with remains that are found by Israeli officials on site. So it's a very grueling task. And for many people going into these kind of centers and going through this process, this is a very painful reckoning, the acknowledgement that their loved ones may be dead or indeed kidnapped. Now the families are beginning to get news from the authorities as to what happened, but they've been facing several days without any knowledge of what's been happening to their loved ones or relatives. So now there are also many funerals across the country. It's a very, very, very sad day.
Yeah.
OK, Yana Lazareva, thank you very much for joining us this morning on GB News from Tel Aviv.
Thank you. Well, in the last half hour, we've been speaking to the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, and we started by asking how concerned he is about the Palestinian civilians involved in the war.
There are concerns of a rise in anti-Semitism in the UK since Hamas launched its attack on Israel. Community Security Trust is a charity that arranges security personnel for Jewish schools across the nation. CEO Mark Gardner says security was already extremely tight, but more measures are being put in place.
You have real proper fencing. You have the school built a long way back from the road in case of a car bomb. You have protective film on the windows. You have CCTVs that feed into our own 24/7 control centre. You have infrared mechanisms that detect any movement breaking through perimeters. You have guards on the site. But whatever else we can add on top, we will do so. There's certainly an increase in the regularity of police patrols past Jewish schools and past places where Jewish school children like wait for buses and come off trains, etc., etc. And there are some schools where there will now be a police presence at opening and closing times.
Since the conflict began this weekend, Jewish communities across London have been supporting each other as people wait to hear for news of their loved ones. Eric Albaz has cousins serving in the Israeli military.
My cousin who sends me regular texts, he said, I'm happy to share my information. He goes, my childhood friend Amit and his brother were killed in Nativ Hassara. The son of our good friend and neighbour was killed as a combat fighter in the battle in Kisuf, where my son is now with his team. A sister of one of my soldiers from Team Oz who was seriously injured in Lebanon. Her husband and little girl were murdered in their home in Kafir, which is a kibbutz in Gaza. So he keeps sending me updates, but it's a true reflection of what's going on firsthand. You do feel on higher alert because there are things that are going on our doorsteps. And a friend of mine who was walking home from synagogue was spat at by just a random person. I myself, when I was walking from synagogue and I was crossing the road, a car opened their window and shouted obscenities about Jews. So it is on our doorstep.
Rabbi Meir Schindler says the Jewish community in North London is feeling helpless.
You know, there's maybe great distance, but in terms of our hearts, we're very close. You know, just simply to find something that we can do, whether it be to donate to a good cause, emergency services, voluntary services there, supplies to soldiers, the reservists who've been called up without any sort of preparation, and just there's not enough food and drink for them. So to donate to those causes and to pray, that's really as much as we could do.
With the conflict escalating, more civilians on both sides are losing their lives, whilst communities in the UK pray that their loved ones survive. Lisa Hartle, GB News, London.
Well, clearly that wasn't the Defence Secretary, that was our report from Lisa Hartle, but we can now hear from Grant Shapps.
Hamas behaviour, and we talked about these reports coming out of babies being butchered, bodies being beheaded, that has no place in the 21st century. That is at a different and completely different moral scale to a country defending itself, typically trying to give notice before, for example, a building is hit, what they call knock and drop, so there's actually opportunity for people to get out. That is completely different to what these terrorists and Hamas are doing. But the responsibility lies fairly and squarely with Hamas in a situation like this. And I don't think there should be any question of trying to make sort of moral equivalence between Israel trying to defend itself and the way that Hamas have gone around butchering people.
And that was Grant Shapps earlier on GB News. Moving on, flights have been suspended at Luton Airport after a large fire engulfed a multi-storey car park overnight, with 5 people reportedly now being taken to hospital with their injuries.
Well, Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Service declared a major incident and passengers have been asked not to travel to the airport.
Well, joining us now from outside Luton Airport is travel expert Simon Calder. Good morning to you, Simon. What's the latest? 5 people hospitalised. Must be absolute chaos for passengers at Luton Airport now.
Well, it's actually eerily quiet, Martin, and that's because, well, apart from hundreds of passengers whose flights were cancelled at the very last minute last night, they were on board the aircraft, and then suddenly about 11:30 they were told, you're not going anywhere, find a hotel. Of course, there were no rooms. Apart from that, it's actually nobody can get in or out. The airport says, do not come here if you are planning to travel before 12 noon. Talk to your airline. All flights have been cancelled until this afternoon at the earliest. The trouble is, with one of the UK's top 5 airports, you can't simply turn it on at 12 o'clock and hope everything is going to work okay. You've got to get the security staff, the check-in people, flight crew all to the airport in order to get things to work. The fire is now most definitely under control. As you say, 5 people treated in hospital for smoke inhalation. Clearly a car park fire, particularly when it is so close to an airport terminal, is a very serious concern because of the problems with fuel, with batteries and real chemical hazard there. Now, there are thousands of people out of position this morning. Loads of flights diverted last night to as far away as Manchester, Liverpool, Bristol and Cardiff. On top of that, I calculate at least 25,000 people so far have had their flights cancelled. That's 170 departures in and out of London Luton. So I'm afraid it's going to take some days before people are where they need to be.
Very comprehensive overview from Simon Calder there. Thanks very much indeed joining us there from Luton Airport.
Yeah, moving on now. This morning, presenter Holly Willoughby has sensationally quit the ITV show after 14 years. This comes after a man was charged with soliciting to commit murder over an alleged plot to kidnap the star.
Well, the mother of 3 took to social media to express her sorrow over leaving the show, but says that the difficult decision was made for her and her family. Let's speak to the showbiz reporter Ellie Phillips, who joins us in the studio. Good morning to you, Ellie. It feels as though the writing was on the wall in terms of Holly's role on This Morning. She probably wanted to go sooner, but this was a good opportunity. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so, yeah. I think this was definitely the last straw. And actually, I was thinking about it before. Publicly, I think people felt that the fallout from This Morning with Holly and Philip Schofield began when the Queen lay in state at the end of last year. But actually, back in April last year, she left YMU, which was her management company, her agency, and set up her own Roxy Management. And I think that actually was when she was like, do you know what? I want to strike out on my own. I want to be in control of my own career here and potentially be separate from Phil, who was at the time signed to YMU. I think that's where it began. And then obviously 5 months ago, he left This Morning. She was adamant that she was going to stay. She actually got her pay packet increased from what was a whopping £700,000. She got more than that to return. She has returned, but instead of returning with a co-host, she's been on her own with this rotation of revolving reporters alongside her, none of which she's particularly gelled well with. And now what's happened is obviously last week we found out awfully that she had this threat against her of kidnap and murder, allegedly. Someone, thankfully, has been charged with that and now is no longer on the streets. However, for her, I think that was, do you know what, enough is enough now. I'm clearly not happy in the show itself. Rumours behind the scenes were that she was struggling without Philip there by her side. And I think this gave her, in a way, an out to say, my time is done, I'm out. But she's not leaving ITV just This Morning.
OK.
And do you think, Addy, that there's a case to be made that the show itself is running out of steam? We saw with Top Gear what happened with Freddie Flintoff. Is the brand itself now so tainted it's time to call it a day, or will the show just roll on?
I think something will obviously always happen in that time slot of a similar format, whether they rebrand it from This Morning to another name, it doesn't matter. But, I mean, to give Holly her dues and herself, she, in her statement, when she said she was resigning, walking away, said that, you know, they're just kind of overseeing the show. The show will continue continue. It's more than just the presenters, as Eamonn's said many a time. It's bigger than the hosts. You know, there's always someone to step in and replace. There are many, many talented presenters out there. It is a difficult job to do. That you have to have a broad knowledge. You have to be able to adapt. She was very good at that. But I think moving forward with the show, they just have to decide, are they going to keep this rotating presenter thing, or are they going to come back probably in January and relaunch with 2 new faces, you know, at the helm?
Very interesting times. Well, thanks very much for the overview, Ellie. Appreciate it.
OK, still to come, we'll be speaking to Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson. That's next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamonn.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, all eyes have been in Liverpool over the last few days for the Labour Party conference. Sir Keir Starmer yesterday, front and centre as he made his pitch for power. And, yeah, it was a bit of a glittering performance, you could say, wasn't it,
He handled
Martin?
it well, I thought. When the Extinction Rebellion Yobbo chucked glitter on, I thought he handled it very well.
Very frightening, actually. It could have been much more serious. So a good job that was all resolved pretty easily. And this chap that you can see on the screen at the moment was arrested. Yeah. But Sir Keir Starmer was promising a decade of renewal under Labour. He said he aims to create a Britain that is built to last. Let's take a listen.
Do not doubt that the fire of change still burns in Britain.
The question is whether it lives on inside Labour, and today we show it does. Today we turn the page, answer the question, why Labour? With a plan for a Britain built to last, with higher growth, safer streets, cheap British power in your home, more opportunity in your community, the NHS off its knees, a Britain with its future back.
Well, a little bit later on this morning, Labour will be unveiling a plan to encourage stronger lifelong numeracy skills. And we're going to speak to the Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, who will be herself taking to the stage today. Good morning to you, Bridget. And I want to talk about that in just a moment. But if we could start with your boss, Sir Keir Starmer. Just a word on the protester invading the stage. I mean, some people, obviously lots of praise for the way he handled it. But do you think there was a sort of quite a slow response? It could have been much more serious, couldn't it?
I thought Keir handled it incredibly well, and he didn't allow himself to be blown off course. I mean, I thought the glitter rather suited him, but I mean, more seriously, it is a concern that someone could get that close, and I'm sure that issue will be reviewed to make sure it can't happen again.
OK, so Bridget, education. Here we are today, echoes of Tony Blair. You're unveiling Labour's plan for real-world primary maths to get primary school kids interested in numeracy. Sounds like Rishi Sunak's plan, which the Labour Party took the mickey out of.
No, the problem with Rishi Sunak's idea is that they start way too late. It's no good at 16 trying to get children involved in a love of maths. We need to do it much earlier because the problems start earlier, which is why today I'm talking about Labour's plans to make sure that our youngest children and right throughout primary school get a really firm foundation in maths, that they really enjoy it, and that we support teachers in how they're teaching maths education and embedding some of those real-world examples into the teaching of maths to bring it to life for children and young people. It's Labour who's the party of high and rising standards in our schools, and I'll be saying more about that today in my conference speech.
And Bridget, part of the plan seems to be the teacher training entitlement, encouraging primary school teachers who don't actually teach maths to increase their numeracy. And of course, this has to be paid for somehow. Isn't part of the problem with the Labour Party getting into power? When Liam Byrne famously left that letter saying there's no money left, national debt was a mere 900 billion. Now it's 2.6 trillion. Where's the money going to come from?
I mean, there's no doubting that the economy is in a total mess, that the Conservatives crashed it and we've got little growth to speak of. But all of the plans that we're setting out, including the plan I'm setting out today around primary numeracy, are fully funded and fully costed. Politics is about the choices that you make, and the choice that Labour would make is to end the tax breaks that private schools enjoy and to put that money into delivering a much stronger, better state education, because that's where the vast majority of our children go to school, with a real push around high and rising standards for our children in school.
Have you ever stepped foot in a private school?
I have, not officially as Shadow Education Secretary, but I have been to private schools in the past. I've used their sports facilities more recently. I'm a keen hockey player and I occasionally visit their wonderful sporting facilities as part of that team. But I'm not responsible for the actions of private schools, and my focus, if I were Education Secretary, would be on those state schools, where the 93% of children in our country go to school.
Yeah, it's interesting you acknowledge the incredible facilities a lot of these private schools allow other people to use, come in, indeed state schools within those communities. And I wonder if that's something to do with the reason you've rowed back on your original plans to remove the charitable status of private schools, because I know very quietly that's gone away from one of your big pushes against the independent sector.
Well, of course, many people will pay to use the facilities that private schools have available. They operate them and will often hire them out. That's the same with state schools too. I have no problem with that. The push that we have is around making sure we can raise that VAT and business rates, those tax reliefs that I don't believe they should have, and we'll invest that money directly into state education. It's a straightforward, quick way of doing it, and we can make sure that we're putting more money into state education. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, Andrew Lewer, he sits on the cross-party Commons Education Select Committee. He said that your policies clearly underline Labour's education views are driven by spite and the politics of envy. And there is some concern that there is a risk of legal action if you go down the route of these VAT changes that could have some sort of unintended consequences for other sectors.
Look, I think those comments from that Conservative MP are frankly just ridiculous. You know, completely out of touch with where the vast majority of parents are. They want a brilliant state education for their children. That's where your viewers will be sending their children, and they want to make sure we got really strong, high and rising standards in the state sector. That's what I'm interested in. That's what I'll be talking about this morning on conference floor. Better math skills for our children, better standards right throughout our school system. But we've got to make choices. If we want more money to invest, then that's why we'll end the tax breaks that private schools enjoy, and we'll use that money really effectively to deliver a better education. And because we all know that education is just so life-changing, particularly from children from more disadvantaged backgrounds.
Bridget, I went to a comprehensive, very proud of that, but I also don't have a problem with private schools. One of the things a lot of people say about the Labour Party, by hammering the private sector, by squeezing the pips out of them to pay for the comps, all you'll do really is the richer pupils will carry on paying, it won't affect them, and you'll squeeze out actually the hard-working, aspirational, upper-working middle classes who will be chucked back into the state system, and their education will suffer as a consequence of you getting the richest to pay, and that will hammer people further down the food chain. Why is it the Labour Party seems so against private schools? I don't get where it comes from.
I fully respect parents' rights to choose what's best for their children, to choose the school that they want to see their children educated in. I have absolutely no problem with that. But my priority is driving up standards in our state schools. That has to be where our focus is. I recognise that parents want the best for their children. Of course they do, but so many middle-class parents have been priced out of private schools. They have put their fees up way beyond inflation over the course of the last decade, and that's why increasingly middle-class parents want to know that the state sector is going to continue to improve, because they simply cannot afford private education. It's way beyond the means of most people.
But it's interesting, many sort of just about managing independent schools, these sort of affordable day schools that often get very good results, have said that they simply don't think that most of the parents that send their children there will be able to absorb any sort of increase in fees that this would bring about. And it's just a really interesting situation, because we don't hear your colleague Wes Streeting saying we're going to improve standards in the NHS by forcing the closure of some of the private hospitals. You know, surely if people are using the private sector, that takes stress off the state. Lots of our viewers actually have been emailing and getting in touch saying parents who send their children to private schools should be getting some kind of tax break for taking pressure off the state sector. And in fact, you've got it the other way round.
The average fee across the country for a private school place is in the region of £16,500. That is way beyond the means of most of your viewers. And in a climate where lots of the people I represent and where voters right across Britain are facing some really tough choices week in, week out about whether they can afford to feed their kids in the way that they would like, about putting things back when they get to the checkout, I think private schools could really be looking to make some economies. Everyone's had to cut back in recent times, and I don't think private schools can be immune from some of that. But the evidence around the impact it would have, the Institute for Fiscal Studies have done a really thorough report, an independent organisation that has said this policy would raise £1.3 to £1.5 billion in net terms, and I would put that towards more teachers, better standards in our state sector.
OK, Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Secretary of State for Education. You'll be making her speech in Liverpool today. Thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
OK, it's time to go through all the latest sports news now, and we're joined in the studio by Paul Coity. We need a bit of cheering up. So Euro 2028 is coming to UK and Ireland, but...
It is something to look forward to for 5 years' time, yeah.
Call me a cynic. Is it only coming here because nobody else wants it, but like Eurovision?
Correct. Next story. No, it's true. It is true. Of course it's true. It's great that we've bid for it, but then again, when you have a bid and then there's nobody else in, I don't know whether it really classes as a bid. We said yesterday it was Turkey that also were up for it as well, and then they decided, actually, you know, we're going to go with Italy because that's been confirmed for the Euros after that. So it is going to be UK and Ireland. The first game is going to be in Cardiff. Gareth Bale was out there. He was paraded out as the face of it. It's going to be at Cardiff at the Principality Stadium. Then Wembley will have the semi-finals and finals. So 28 matches in England. Scotland, Wales and Ireland have 6 matches. And then Northern Ireland at Casement Park, which you may or may not know has not been built yet. Is a bit of a load of rubble at the moment, but there's promises that it will be ready. So it's something to look forward to. We've got Harry Kane was there with Sadiq Khan and also Gareth Southgate. I was trying to work out which of the 3 will actually still be there by the time 2028 comes round. But Harry says, wants to still be playing, and then he'll be in his late 30s, wants to play on for as long as he can.
I'm getting a little bit concerned. They're already clearing their throats for a rendition of It's Coming Home, because Harry Kane is saying that they're going to win the tournament to bury the ghosts of 96 and 2021. Already, expectations are getting artificially raised.
Of course we are. I mean, how many ghosts have we got to erase? Every time we've got to go back, and it's the ghost of this one, it's the ghost of that one. So hopefully, Harry Kane will bring it home. I'm a bit tired of the song, to be honest with you. Aren't you? It's coming home.
Yeah, I mean, I was born tired of that song.
You didn't even like it when it first came out in '96. But anyway, it's something to look forward to. It will be a festival of football. It's going to be terrific. And hopefully no problems like there were.
Can we talk rugby? You know I always like to talk rugby.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although it's a bit of a neggy story and poor ticket sales for England in rugby union.
Well, they're saying about 2,500 tickets still available for the England-Fiji game, but it's being played in Marseille. Now, it's very easy to go, oh, England haven't been very good, so nobody actually wants to go and see them. The situation, let's be honest, Marseille is right down in the south of France. It's a long journey. Playing Fiji, is that going to be the glamour tie that we're looking forward to? With respect, I don't think so. If it had been New Zealand, if it had been South Africa, if it had been Wales, then there would have been more ticket sales, and if it had been further up north as well. I don't know how the bed bugs are.
I was just about to say that.
Do you think that's what it is?
Honestly, yeah, every time I sort of think, I'd love to go and see that, or it'd be great if we get into the final.
You're a hardy rugby fan, aren't you?
The atmosphere. My husband's Welsh, so he's mad for it.
Yeah.
But bed bugs.
I know.
Maybe that's affecting ticket sales.
But maybe the answer is you go there and watch the game, you just don't sleep. Just keep away from the bed.
Don't book a hotel.
Just don't book a hotel.
Stay awake all night.
Just stay away.
Day trip it.
Anyway, that's on Sunday. So, I mean, we've got some great semi-finals. So it's France, South Africa, which is Sunday. Ireland, New Zealand.
That'll be a good match. There'll be no problem with ticket sales there.
No, none at all. Wales, there's still a few tickets available. Right. But because that's against Argentina on Saturday, by the time we get to the semi-finals, should, touch wood, England get through to the semi-finals, which I am extremely concerned about, as I think most English fans are, then we'll just have to see.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a great weekend of rugby.
They need their fans there.
Of course. I've got one more for you as well.
Oh, yeah?
We did a dog story yesterday?
Yeah, good. Yeah.
I've got another dog story. We had a dog that was playing football in Mexico. Now, this is lovely. Now, this is something I would love to see this done in this country. You know when you get the teams come out with the mascots?
Yeah, the kids.
The kids come out. Now, what they've done... Now, have a look at this. This is in Fortaleza in Brazil. They have dog mascots, and now the dogs are all dogs that need homes.
Oh.
So what they've done, it's like the dog's home, so each one will be brought out by a player. This has been done in other countries in the world as well. So then people will see the dogs, and they will say, each of these dogs need home. Look, a little tricky one there. I don't know if he's going to do anything. But then it not only highlights the fact that there's lots of dogs that need adopted, but also those dogs are up for adoption, and then their pictures come on the screen, and then people could go afterwards and say, you know what, I would love that.
No one complains about sports washing when you're talking about the rights of doggies.
That's right.
Isn't that coming out in defence of dogs?
If I could get Spurs to do that, can you imagine walking
Although,
out with
just imagine if Doggy did a doo-doo.
Well, this is what I was wondering.
I was about to say,
I was worried about
on the pitch.
I know. Can you...
Oh, very good.
Yes, exactly. Well, there you go. So I don't know how... I know what a lot of groundsmen are like these days, but it's probably do it good, actually. You know, it's probably a little fertiliser.
Localised fertiliser.
Get some VAR on that.
There was nothing worse, though, when you play football, though, and you skid on one, so I don't want that to happen. So, anyway, but it's a lovely idea. I'd love to see it over here.
We'll see you later. Thanks,
Somebody had to say it. OK.
Still to come, more on those bed bugs. Have they invaded London Underground now? We'll have the details after this.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
We're going to take you through the front pages first of all now as we go into our paper review, starting with the Daily Mail, and it's leading with the full horror of Israel's 9/11 as Hamas gunmen, or indeed terrorists.
That's a video we'll be coming to later in the paper review, but in the Mirror, Keir Starmer yesterday offered the nation hope for the future as he vowed to undo the damage caused by Tory misrule.
And finally, The Sun, they're going with this morning, but we're not able to show you the front pages, so you just have to take my word for it. They are reporting on how she stepped down from the show after 14 years. OK, let's go through the papers. We're joined this morning by Dawn Neeson, Andy Jones, taking us through them. And Andy, we've just been speaking to Bridget Phillipson, who's making her speech up in Liverpool today. And we also started by reflecting really on Sir Keir Starmer's sparkling performance, courtesy of all the glitter yesterday. What is the Mirror making of it? Of course, a left-leaning paper.
So it was a glittering speech, not quite in the way he wanted, but let's get to the guts of it, because we've all heard all about that. He's talking about a decade of renewal. It's going to take a decade of renewal to right Britain on a proper axis. He's got to get in once before he gets in again and again for that decade, but he wants to end the stranglehold of Tory decline. He wants to build 1.5 million homes. So that is basically 5 Milton Keynes worth of homes. We're not quite sure where he's going to build those or how. He's talking about the grey belt, removal of the grey belt. This isn't the green belt of our lush, wonderful outdoor spaces. This is the sort of grey wastelands where we're not building anything on it. And why? We need to reduce the amount of red tape to build on these things. And this is something that a lot of the parties have discussed, not just the Labour Party. He also wants to cut the 8 a.m. scramble for GP appointments. Again, we don't necessarily hear how, but I think it's something that we all agree with. And he wants a publicly owned GB Energy, an alternative to some of the privately owned energy companies which have been wringing our bank accounts dry over the last few years. Well, I mean, those are the top headlines on it.
I wonder if
it's not necessarily the policy, it's on how you're going to do it. 1.5 million homes, great. Wall hack.
Well, that's
Where?
kind of the point Grant Shapps was making when we spoke to the Defence Secretary. It used to be one of his many portfolios a few portfolios ago, sort of pouring cold water on it, and especially as they're very much in favour of devolution. Well, we know at local level how much people oppose having new housing developments built on their backyards.
Yeah,
so
I've got to say as well, we were promised in advance of this conference, Dawn, policy-rich detail. And actually, new homes, we knew about that a few weeks ago. And improving the NHS, we always hear about that. Did we actually hear anything that new from Keir Starmer yesterday? Because there was lots of rhetoric, lots of swelling up of the chest, lots of glitter. But did we actually get any detail?
Well, I think the problem you've always got with our party conferences from all parties is they are very sketchy on the detail. And, you know, I mean, Keir was talking a good talk, you know, working people respected, crime prosecuted, ambulances come, minimum wage enforced, infrastructure gets built. Yeah, it all sounds great. I mean, no one's going to say, no, I don't want any of that stuff.
Yeah.
No, stop. But, I mean, there is no detail, and the devil is always in the detail. And as Andy was just saying, this sort of like, you know, the building of the 1.5 million homes, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, didn't Boris Johnson go on about scrapping the planning laws and building more homes? And I feel like everyone's been saying it since time immemorial, and no one actually seems to get it done.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that they're sort of almost afraid to announce new policies because their lead is so strong in the polls. They just don't want to open themselves up for anything.
Yeah.
It's kind of like steady as she goes, as long as they can. Keep quiet because it's working. And the one policy that they have announced, which is this, you know, a sort of attack on private schools as the Conservatives see it, they've already had to U-turn on the charitable status. And certainly, look, from this blue wall that they are trying to reach out to, that's not going to go down well with them. So it's not worth it.
No, I think you're right. I think they're scared of announcing actual policy because...
They don't need to.
Well, they don't need to lose some votes. And plus, the other side will probably nick it.
And do you know the target of this grey land? Guess where that was originally put into a manifesto, which party and what year? 2015, UKIP. UKIP have been saying this for years. UKIP have been saying, because they don't want to go after the Green Belt because they're going to lose votes in NIMBYs, so let's scramble around and find all this land. This is the recycled, reheated UKIP policy from Starmer. So, again, the country seems to be ready for change, but no real meat on the bone.
Quite. I agree that, but also in a conference you're never going to get all of the micro detail across because otherwise it's just going to be impenetrable, right? Yeah. But looking back from Rishi's speech, what was it, 10 days ago, a week ago, the only things I can remember off the top of my head is the smoking stuff and HS2. So... I think Starmer's got a bit more meat to the bones than Rishi's speech.
Didn't get his wife to introduce him, though.
No, but he got glitter. Come on.
He did.
I think,
he had his own version.
Every leader now should
have
have
an intro.
glitter.
We're going to look at a viral video now, and this one is Norwich Football Club, Norwich City, I should say. They've launched what is, frankly, a very powerful video, all to mark World Health Day, and we can take a little look.
Oh, wow. How are you doing? You good? Oh, sorry, thank you. How you doing? God, it's exciting, isn't it?
So, how's the week? You okay? Yeah. I hope things are better outside of football.
That's incredibly powerful.
Very poignant video. Just for the benefit of those who couldn't see that on radio, there were two football fans at Carrow Road, Norwich's ground, celebrating. One of them was on the surface very, very happy and bubbly and vivacious, getting stuck into the match, and the other one was quite grumpy. And then at the end there, one of the fans had taken his own life, and when you cut to who was there, it was the happy guy that had gone. And I guess the message, Andy, from this is on World Mental Health Day, you know, what you see on the surface isn't what's going on inside. and a lot of men in particular kind of overcompensate with the bravado, but the truth can be very different inside.
Yeah, I've always reported on suicide cases, and very often we had absolutely no idea. And that's public figures and that's private individuals. And the message from this campaign is speak to people. And it is if you haven't spoken to your friend, get in touch with them, send them a text, ring them. It's family members, get in touch, send them a text, ring them. It's reach out. And that conversation, that simple, how are you, that 5-minute phone call or even just a voice note can make a huge impact to somebody.
Yeah, it makes me emotional, actually.
I watched it yesterday and I couldn't stop watching. I go to football every week, and so many of the men there will spend like half an hour discussing the intricacies of a VAR decision. But you ask them how they are, and it's like, I'm fine. They just don't talk about it. And sort of like, I think, you know, men are 3 times more likely to take their own lives than women. And the suicide rate is halved for women since 1981, but only gone down 17%. It's the biggest killer for young men in this country. So I think it's so important for Norwich to put this video out there. And hopefully men get the message. Start talking. It's not all about VAR decisions.
Yeah, well done, Norwich City, absolutely. We were talking about bed bugs with Paul Coit a little bit earlier on, Dawn, and... oh, my goodness.
I think he's got him.
I was going to say, does Paul have a particular problem with this one, then?
Well, he was itching the last few days.
Yeah,
but in all seriousness, there is some sort of picture and footage now of these being spotted on the London Underground.
On the London, but they're tiny weenies.
They look like ladybirds to me. I'm not convinced.
They're horrible.
Have you got them as well, then?
Well, I've got ants in my pants.
We're already on your pants. Marvellous. It's been in the papers for quite a few days now, but page 5 of the Daily Mail's done a big story about it. And these are invading from France. And there's horrific pictures from the streets of Marseille where people are just chucking out their mattresses onto the streets because the infection is so high. And they have now spread across the channel, and they are here, and they are on the London Underground. And, you know, there's been a 65% increase in bedbug infestations the year September. And they're really, really hard to get rid of. And Luton actually is the bedbug central of the UK at the moment. Now, quite why they're all going to Luton, I have no idea. But they are actually on the case. Now, most of the time, don't want to worry people, most of the time a bite is harmless. You're going to get a bit red, a bit itchy, etc., etc. But you can have an allergic reaction like you can to a bee sting or a wasp sting. But they're incredibly difficult to get out.
That's the main problem. It's not so much the irritation they cause, it's just that it can be years.
If you get them
get
them in your house, you have to have the whole house fumigated, almost every piece
and even
of
that
furniture.
might not. The whole house has to be dismantled.
And there's horrible footage there on screen of bedbugs on public transport. Interesting about Luton, because there's a huge conversation, a TV star in France who's been cancelled because he said they're coming from the third world, they're coming on people. Luton, obviously being an airport terminal, there could be something other. It's actually because of the world is warmer and they're prospering and breeding, and they just happen to be hitching a lift on people. Eurostar. Next thing you know, they're on the Underground. Next thing you know, they're on your Paul Coit's leg. Next thing you know, they're in your house.
I bought an antique bed for my daughter. We've moved house into a really old house, so I wanted to get a bed that kind of fitted, and it came with a mattress. So I put the mattress in, and suddenly, as I was driving in this morning and I was listening to it, I suddenly thought, I mean, we've had it a few months now, and no bites, but I did think maybe, you know, second-hand mattresses aren't really that nice.
But they are.
I should order a new one.
They are actually hotspot.
The interesting thing is we largely got rid of bed bugs after the Second World War by using a chemical, but this new bed bugs are resistant to that chemical.
Right.
And so this is why they're so hard to get rid of. And also we saw horrifying scenes in Paris of people chucking out all of their furniture, all of their mattresses, all of the beds, and the whole street's blocked up with people's furniture that they're chucking out.
Very glamorous for Paris. They've just had Paris Fashion Week. They've got the World Cup going on, and all the eyes of the world on France.
Oh God, I'm itching.
So grim.
Well, they're French. You'll probably set fire to them all and get rid of them. Andy, moving on to this story. What's going on at a posh restaurant with chicken pies, including, what's this, a head?
Have you got the image of this? There's an image of this. It's a posh chicken restaurant called Le Grand Coq. 22 quid for a pie, and it's filled with chicken hearts, livers and all sorts of bits. But rather like the scene of Alien in a Sigourney Weaver film.
Can I have a look and I'll see if I can hold it up?
Coming out
we aren't
of
able
the
to
pie.
show the pictures today. Which camera would you like that? Oh, we've got to try not to
You've got
show
to zoom
too much.
just
Oh, it's the wrong way around. There we go.
There you go.
Just in here.
Here we go. We've got a little head coming out of that. Which camera would you like, Megan? Do you want anyone in particular?
Right just there, and you can see.
There you go.
You can get chicken on a stick with a leg sticking out of it. It seems very, very gimmicky. very grotesque. I'm all for
So just to be clear, this head is plucked. So it's sort of a fleshy... You know how you
Still
used to
got
have
the
those
beak on it.
pie aerators
that's right.
with the open beak?
That's the blackbird.
That's the purpose of that. Yeah, the blackbird
So
beak.
rather than a blackbird beak made out of pottery, it's a real chicken's head coming out of the pie with its beak open. It looks horrible.
This costs you £22, by the way. It's a London pop-up restaurant. And the thing is, in their defence, they are saying that we're using all parts of the bird, so there's no waste. So it's actually quite an environmentally
no one's going to
friendly
eat that, are they? They'll take that out of their pie and put it on the side. I don't accept that argument. We're using it all. No, you're going to stick that in the bin
They also do a kebab thing with
Ozzy Osbourne, isn't it?
Yeah. They also do a drumstick with the foot still on it, so you get the foot as well.
And you can even get a creme caramel with chicken fat on top of it, which is a bit extra to me.
Have you ever eaten chicken feet?
Yes.
It's not for me. I have
delicacy.
gnawed on one.
My mate's Vietnamese and he loves chicken feet. So that's the best bit. And his favourite bit of salmon is the cheeks. Apparently salmon cheeks is the best meat 'cause it does the most work. There you go, you live and learn.
You do live and learn. Oh, every day's a school day.
It is.
Thanks for that. We've only got 30 seconds. Andy, can you in 30 seconds give us tips on how to avoid being swindled by people like the Tinder swindler?
Yeah, the victim of the Tinder swindler has done an interview in the Telegraph about how to avoid being romance scammed. And number one is, if they ask for money, don't give them money. But it's also, if they're love-bombing you at the start of the relationship and saying, I love you, that's a bad sign. And also, anyone that's also spending huge amounts of time online, but funnily enough, when you want to meet them, they're not available.
Lots of red flags there. Andy, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to you, Dawn. See you again soon. For now, though, we're going to take a little break. Back in a sec.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamonn.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very good morning to you. It has just gone 8 o'clock and it's Wednesday, the 11th of October. Welcome to Breakfast with Isabel, Webster and Martin Daubney today.
And here's what's leading the news this morning. Inside an Israeli border village where entire families were killed, reporters have shown the scene of a massacre where the bodies of men, women and children and even babies have been found, according to the Israeli military. Earlier, we spoke to Defence Secretary Grant Shapps.
Hamas behaviour, and we talked about these reports coming out of babies being butchered, bodies being beheaded. That has no place in the 21st century. That is at a different and completely different moral scale to a country defending itself.
And in the last few moments, we've been hearing that the Israeli military have claimed hundreds of thousands of troops are massing near the Gaza border. And Israel is now expected to launch a ground offensive on the Gaza Strip very soon. GB News' investigative reporter Charlie Peters is in Tel Aviv for us.
Here in Tel Aviv, a city famed for its party culture, the beach is silent. The only sound above us is of fighter jets, and an Israeli naval destroyer looms over the beach as Israeli troops are likely to go into Gaza.
And we're back to Charlie throughout the morning. And this comes as the European Union condemns Israel's blockade of Gaza, saying the denial of food, water and electricity is illegal under international law.
Meanwhile, the Home Secretary has ramped up security across the UK to protect Jewish communities from hate crimes.
And elsewhere, Sir Keir Starmer took to the stage at the Labour Party conference in his pitch for power, promising to get Britain's future back. This comes as a protester took to the stage to sprinkle the leader with glitter during his speech. GB News' political deputy editor Tom Harwood is in Liverpool for us.
It was a dramatic moment for Sir Keir Starmer yesterday. The Labour Party will be hoping that today is rather calmer and perhaps this conference will go by without further event. But today we're hearing from the Shadow Education Secretary, the Shadow Health Secretary and one or two others, wrapping up what the Labour Party will probably see as a relatively successful conference here in Liverpool.
And ITV's This Morning presenter Holly Willoughby sensationally quit the show after 14 years. This comes as a man has been charged with soliciting to commit murder over an alleged plot to kidnap her.
And Aidan McGibbon has your weather.
It's a reversal of fortunes for much of the UK in today's weather. Brighter skies for Scotland, but wetter conditions for Wales and central England. Full details in the forecast.
And you can join in any of our discussions throughout the course of the morning. Thank you for sending in your thoughts on email to gbviews@gbnews.com and for your tweets at GBNews. We'll continue to reflect them throughout the show. Well, here's our top story this morning. It's day 5 of Israel's war on Hamas, and we've been hearing shocking details overnight of a massacre during the terror group's assault on Israeli communities. Reporters have been shown the scene of a massacre at a village close to Gaza.
And a warning, you may find some of these images disturbing. This is the village of Kfar Azar. It's a kibbutz where the military told reporters men, women and children and even babies were shot dead by Hamas gunmen.
Well, the military told reporters that entire families were found dead in their own homes, including babies.
And Israel's bombing campaign on Gaza continues this morning, and Hamas have also fired rockets into Israel.
Yeah, more than 200 buildings were destroyed overnight, and the United Nations is reporting that 260,000 civilians have so far been displaced and that entire neighbourhoods have been destroyed. Meanwhile, Hamas has continued to fire rockets into Israel.
And casualty numbers are mounting on both sides as Israel put their death toll at 1,200, and the Gaza Health Ministry reported at least 900 people have been killed in airstrikes.
Well, Gaza's sole power plant has fuel for just another 12 hours at most, leaving hospitals worried about care. This comes after the European meeting last night, the EU foreign policy chief saying that he opposed the blockade of Gaza.
Israel has the right to defend, but it has to be done accordingly with international law, humanitarian law. And some decisions are counter this international law. The Palestinian Authority is our partner. We don't deal with Hamas, but yes, we support and we deal and we work together with the Palestinian Authority. And not all the Palestinian people are terrorists. So a collective punishment against all Palestinians will be unfair and unproductive.
Well, earlier we spoke to Defence Secretary Grant Shapps and started by asking how concerned he is about the Palestinian civilians involved in the war.
Hamas behaviour, and we talked about these reports coming out of babies being butchered, bodies being beheaded. That has no place in the 21st century. That is at a different and completely different moral scale to a country defending itself, typically trying to give notice before, for example, a building is hit, what they call knock and drop, so there's actually opportunity for people to get out. That is completely different to what these terrorists and Hamas are doing. But the responsibility lies fairly and squarely with Hamas in a situation like this. And I don't think there should be any question of trying to make sort of moral equivalence between Israel trying to defend itself and the way that Hamas have gone around butchering people.
Well, the UK and the United States have offered their full support to Israel to try and contain Hamas. The first plane load of ammunition from America has landed in Israel, and we can get an update from our GB News reporter Charlie Peters, who's in Tel Aviv. And we've been hearing about troops massing on the border with Gaza over the last few days. The IDF talking about armoured soldiers, artillery corps, 300,000 or so reservists close to the border. Have we had it confirmed yet that there will be this land invasion, which for so many years the authorities have really been trying to avoid? And does that increase the pressure to try and create some sort of humanitarian corridor for civilians in that very tiny strip of land?
Well, talk of a ground invasion into Gaza by the IDF is now extremely common. It is expected, it's highly likely in the next 24 to 48 hours. As you said, over 300,000 IDF reservists activated in the last 3 days, many of them flying in from overseas. We have seen convoys of heavy armour, light armour, air defence assets, all moving south, all typical shaping activity for what is likely to be the decisive action in the next phase of this complex war. Here in Tel Aviv, though, this is the relative shelter for Israelis, fleeing the devastation in southern Israel, but also rocket attacks further north. Behind me, the skyscrapers of Ashdod were targeted by rocket attack yesterday. Many of those rockets landed successfully. Some even came as far as Tel Aviv, where we are, where the air raid sirens went into activation a few times and people took shelter. What are they escaping? Well, they're escaping the butchery of Hamas terrorists in the south. The stories, as you have referred to, are truly horrifying. They have described it as ISIS-style butchery and a level of violence really unprecedented for the region. Now, earlier last night, I spoke with Danielle, who fled from her kibbutz in southern Israel on Saturday. Did you see anything in the street when you drove through? Did you see
bodies? And yeah, mostly bodies. Some of them were burned, so we didn't recognize people. Some of them were terrorist bodies. Later on, I found out that I have a few of my friends in the party, in the rave that was raging at that morning. Some of them were kidnapped, some of them were raped and taken under hostage to the Gaza Strip. It was really horrible.
Well, US armaments arrived in Israel last night as the Israeli armed forces prepare for that likely ground assault into Gaza. Civilians are heading north, but the military, it seems, the only direction for them is south.
Charlie, thanks very much indeed.
Okay, let's speak now to freelance journalist Jotam Confino. Good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. The reports coming out of the aftermath of what happened when Hamas came in on Saturday are now emerging. This is not a war, it's genocide, the IDF are saying, talking about those massacres, including babies and children found dead. What's the mood on the ground there now in the aftermath of this atrocity?
Shock and anger, I would say. I'm not sure if people are so shocked about what Hamas is capable of. We do know that they were behind suicide attack in Tel Aviv during the Second Intifada, but still, there's something about the beheading and the babies that just makes that it puts it into a different category. And like Prime Minister Netanyahu said, like US President Joe Biden says, they're comparing it to Daesh, to Islamic State. I would have to mention the number that a lot of media are going with right now, 40 babies, which came from one report from an Israeli TV channel. I reached out to the military to ask them to verify this number because I've seen it everywhere now. It's spreading like wildfire. And they say we cannot, and I stress we cannot confirm that number. What we can confirm is that elderly, women, and toddlers were massacred in an Islamic State style, and we know what that means. And I also have spoken to someone whose husband is right now there, and he is with his own eyes seeing the beheadings. But as far as the number goes, it's important that we remember to verify the information, to get it correct, because we are being flooded with information during this war. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, Jotam, a really, really important point to make, and we obviously also haven't been able to independently verify that, but certainly Reuters were quoting the Israeli Major General Itav Veruv, who was reporting seeing babies, mothers, parents in their bedrooms, many of them having been involved in the massacre, and describing the mode of death as being brutal, as you say, like ISIF-style decapitations and the like. But the numbers of those involved, highly emotive, has the potential to be inflammatory, and it's really important that all of this is very carefully detailed and reported. So thank you for stressing that. Nevertheless, I mean, we did speak to our Defence Secretary about the reports that we've been hearing coming out of these kibbutz, and he says that there is absolutely no moral equivocation on any of this or moral equivalence to what's been going on in Gaza.
No, absolutely not. You can't compare the atrocities committed around the Gaza border communities by Hamas and what Israel is trying to do. If it was up to Israel, probably 2.1 million Gazans would leave Gaza. They would leave Gaza just in one big cage with Islamic and Jihad, and then they would eradicate that. Israel doesn't have an interest in slaughtering civilians. In fact, it's very, very bad for Israel. Every time civilians are killed in Gaza, Israel is blamed, and rightfully so, because sometimes they are killed and they aren't being taken proper precautions. At least that's the criticism that they get. So Israel has no interest in this. It's a very, very bad image for Israel that's coming out from Gaza right now, with flattened neighborhoods. But again, Israel right now says we have to defend ourselves. This was an abnormal atrocity committed against us, and we have to defend ourselves now.
OK, Jotam, it seems now going from the defensive onto the offensive, if we're to believe reports of the mass gathering of Israeli troops near the Gaza border, ready to execute the mission we have been given. How does that play out? You're in Tel Aviv now. The prospect of boots on the ground, a large-scale invasion looks likely. This is taking things to the next stage now, isn't it?
Absolutely, and the kind woman that lives next to me, who opens her shelter for me every time there are rockets fired, her son was, for example, drafted. I think most people in Israel know somebody who's been drafted, either sons, brothers, friends. All young, capable men are now drafted, and they are ready, and we all know what that means. It means that we would like to see a ground invasion, but it's something that has to be agreed upon in the Security Cabinet, and also right now we have a whole political turmoil with Prime Minister Netanyahu trying to to establish a unity emergency government with some of the more centrist parties in Israel, some of whom have former defense minister and former IDF generals in them, instead of having just his own coalition with a lot of people who never served a day in the army, who are extremely racist and extremely right-wing and nationalistic. So he's trying to have more of like a broad, responsible national emergency government. And it's something that he's been criticized harshly for not being able to establish until now. We're on day 5 now. This should have happened within 24 hours. He's being attacked for playing politics here. So it's a really, really bad situation on that front also.
Yeah, absolutely. And the eyes of the world on it, with the EU and indeed President Biden reminding Israel of its duty to operate within the confines of international law, which of course is hugely difficult when we're talking about a place where you can hardly separate terrorists from civilians, an ongoing nightmare situation. Jotam Confino, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date this morning.
And here there are worries the conflict could lead to a rise of anti-Semitism in the UK.
Yes, Jewish schools have had to increase security, and communities are supporting one another as they wait to hear if friends and family have been caught up in the tragedy. GB News reporter Lisa Hartle has more.
There are concerns of a rise in anti-Semitism in the UK since Hamas launched its attack on Israel. Community Security Trust is a charity that arranges security personnel for Jewish schools across the nation. CEO Mark Gardner says security was already extremely tight, but more measures are being put in place.
You have real proper fencing. You have the school built a long way back from the road in case of a car bomb. You have protective film on the windows. You have CCTVs that feed into our own 24/7 control centre. You have infrared mechanisms that detect any movement breaking through perimeters. You have guards on the site. But whatever else we can add on top, we will do so. There's certainly an increase in the regularity of police patrols past Jewish schools and past places where Jewish school children like wait for buses and come off trains, etc., etc. And there are some schools where there will now be a police presence at opening and closing times.
Since the conflict began this weekend, Jewish communities across London have been supporting each other as people wait to hear for news of their loved ones. Eric Elbaz has cousins serving in the Israeli military.
My cousin who sends me regular texts, he said, I'm happy to share my information. He goes, my childhood friend Amit and his brother were killed in Nativ Hassara. The son of our good friend and neighbour was killed as a combat fighter in the battle in Kisuf, where my son is now with his team. A sister of one of my soldiers from Team Oz who was seriously injured in Lebanon. Her husband and little girl were murdered in their home in Kafir, which is a kibbutz in Gaza. So he keeps sending me updates, but it's a true reflection of what's going on firsthand. You do feel on higher alert because there are things that are going on our doorsteps. And a friend of mine who was walking home from synagogue was spat at by just a random person. I myself, when I was walking from synagogue and I was crossing the road, a car opened their window and shouted obscenities about Jews. So it is on our doorstep.
Rabbi Meir Schindler says the Jewish community in North London is feeling helpless.
You know, there's maybe great distance, but in terms of our hearts, we're very close. You know, just simply to find something that we can do, whether it be to donate to a good cause, emergency services, voluntary services there, supplies to soldiers, the reservists who've been called up without any sort of preparation, and just there's not enough food and drink for them. So to donate to those causes and to pray, that's really as much as we could do.
With the conflict escalating, more civilians on both sides are losing their lives, whilst communities in the UK pray that their loved ones survive. Lisa Hartle, GB News, London.
And Sir Keir Starmer took to the stage to pitch for power yesterday during the Labour Party conference, with a protester covering the opposition leader with glitter ahead of his speech.
Yeah, Starmer promised a decade of renewal under Labour and said he aims to create a Britain that is built to last. Joining us now is our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. Still going strong up in Liverpool, Tom. It feels like conference season is so nearly over. Last day, I think, today. Just give us a sense of what we can expect and what the mood is following on from the leader's speech yesterday.
Isabel, I have to say, the mood was pretty jubilant last night. The Labour Party putting out emails to its supporters saying the words sparkle with Starmer. They're really leaning into the glitter. I saw Keir Starmer last night at one of the evening events that go on at this conference, and he also made light of the fact, saying he got himself glittered up specially for the evening. But clearly what the Labour Party see is beyond the stunt, that this is a Labour Party that is very different to the Labour Party that was conducting these conferences just 3 or so years ago. Starmer made the allusion himself to the idea that the party is no longer a party of protest. It's a party perspective about power now, and it's a party now subject to protest rather than being the party that partakes in that protest. He says that's an indication of how much the party has changed. But I have to say, Isabel, there are a few sore throats this morning after the Mirror Party karaoke last night, where Labour Party stalwarts from John Ashworth to Lisa Nandy, Wes Streeting and others got up there on the stage to sing a litany of hits, not least Common People, D. Reams, Things Can Only Get Better, and Don't Look Back in Anger as well, with Lucy Powell, the Manchester MP, getting really into the swing of things. I have to say that we are looking forward to a couple of speeches this morning. I'm not sure how Wes Streeting will handle his speech after some pretty enthusiastic dancing last night on the floor of that party, but he's speaking a little bit later today.
And just, you know, due impartiality and all that, just checking that you were partaking in some of these parties, and I know GB News also hosted some drinks at these conferences after our very successful party last week in Manchester for Tory Party conference. Just give us a flavour.
Absolutely. Well, we hosted a drinks do just a couple of days ago that was fairly well attended by Labour MPs here.
Good.
In Liverpool at the Labour Party conference. But yes, of course, I was on the dance floor last night. I'm not sure if you can hear it in my voice. I wonder if actually we can get this programme to maybe play a clip or two of some of these sing-songs a little bit later in the programme. We'll see if we can sort that out. But no, generally what we've seen is a pretty jubilant mood here at the Labour Party conference. It feels like activists and indeed parliamentarians here have to pinch themselves every now and again just to make sure they're not getting too triumphant ahead of what they assume is going to be a pretty sizable victory at the next election.
Challenge accepted, Tom. We will endeavour to get that on before we come off air in just over an hour's time. And you know what? We endorse you dancing and singing till the small hours, because I know that some absolutely critical journalistic scoops are acquired that way. Long may it continue. Thanks very much, Tom.
Well, that's where all the hard work gets done. Is it interesting how they're still playing D-Ream Things Going to Get Better? That, of course, was Tony Blair's anthem. And actually, they're talking about Common People, Don't Look Back in Anger. It's the Britpop. It's back to the 90s.
It's always... Yeah, go on.
No, they're playing the soundtrack to Blairism right now.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a rerun, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the parallels are so interesting. I always find it quite an interesting angle to not just conferences but elections and the music and the involvement, and we see it a lot in the States, and then we see all the artists coming out going, whoa, 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 I wasn't consulted, I don't want Trump playing my music or whoever it might be. So I wonder if they had to consult people in order to have their music at the conference.
I would have thought they got the clearance, but not like the Rolling Stones don't want to play at a Trump rally.
Well, there we go. Right, let's turn our attention and stay with entertainment matters. This morning, presenter Holly Willoughby has, we're reflecting on it after she sensationally quit the ITV show after 14 years.
Yeah, this comes after a man was charged with soliciting to commit murder over an alleged plot to kidnap the star.
Yeah, well, she is, of course, a mother of 3. She took to social media to express her sorrow about leaving the show, but said that the difficult decision had been made for her and for her family.
And we're joined now in the studio by showbiz reporter Steph Tachi. So, Steph, this decision, it's felt like it's been coming for a while. Was this inevitable?
It was, Martin. Unfortunately, you know, Holly's really tried to persevere through the last year, through the Q-Gate scandal, the Philip Schofield scandal. She really wanted to be at the forefront of the new chapter for this morning. And unfortunately, last week's incident seems like it was the final straw for her. She is a mother of 3, family, and it is family first for her. As the public, we don't know the full details of this horrific alleged kidnap plot, but she does. And from what she knows about it, her and her family have been left absolutely petrified. As you can know, working in live television, you cannot be put in a front that everything's OK if you know at the back of your mind, this is what could have happened to you and your family. So she is putting her safety first. It's not the end of the road for her and ITV. It's just the end of the road with her and This Morning. I do feel she will come back and work on other shows, but I don't see Holly doing live television.
It's really interesting because, you know, just in terms of Holly's brand, stepping away at the point that Philip Schofield left under a bit of a cloud of scandal, let's be honest, wouldn't have done her any good because in some way she'd be implicated. So although this is clearly highly traumatic, the allegations of a kidnap plot, in some ways do you think it might have given her an opportunity to part ways from a show when she might have been feeling like, you know, her time was done anyway?
Yeah. Definitely. She's been on the show for 14 years. I think for both Holly and Phil, they didn't envision leaving the show in this way. The viewers has been waning. It's lost popularity with people. But I think for Holly, she did not want to leave when Philip left. She wanted to keep on going, and there's no light that ITV bosses want to change the show and change it into something different. January was when they were going to relaunch it into something new with Holly and maybe Ben Shepherd as her co-presenter. But now ITV bosses are going to have to be looking for a new Phil and a new Holly.
It's an interesting book. A few days ago, we were talking about Top Gear and the fact that with what happened with Freddie Flintoff, that show just naturally reached the end of the road, so to speak. Do you think that the show itself now is so tainted by the scandals of the presenters that actually it needs to be just thrown in the bin and completely start again with a fresh slate?
Or as Eamonn has always said, it's bigger than the hosts and will go on.
As we say in showbiz, the show must always go on, and, you know, it's been there for 35 years. So This Morning as a brand will go on, but I think with Holly there, it was dwindling, it was losing popularity. So now actually is a chance for ITV bosses to create something new with, hopefully, with fresh faces.
OK. Steph, thanks very much indeed for that update.
OK, still to come, we'll be debating whether Labour can lead the country to a better Britain. But first, here's your weather.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GBNews, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. Thanks for your company. It's just gone 8:30. We're reflecting on Labour conference that's ongoing up north in Liverpool. And yesterday, big day for Sir Keir Starmer. He promised a decade of renewal and national renewal under what he says would be a government for the next, 10 years, he's hoping. He's not only thinks he's going to win the next election, but the one after that. And he said he would build a generation of new towns and a total of 1.5 million additional homes.
Yeah, and he also said that Labour will reform the NHS, of course, and recruit more police officers. But will we see a better Britain if Starmer becomes our next Prime Minister?
Well, joining us now is Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, who says Labour will destroy Britain.
And the former editor at the Labour list, Peter Edwards, who says Labour will make Britain great again. Good morning to you both. I'll start with you, Peter, if I could. And a comment here has come in from Dave, who says this: even covered in glitter, Sir Keir Starmer couldn't light up the Strictly dance floor on a Saturday night. So despite all the razzmatazz, quite a few people still unconvinced by Sir Keir Starmer.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm convinced at all, and I don't think he'll be bothered about what he looks like on the dance floor. The whole point of Keir Starmer is, after the chaos and melodrama of the Conservative Prime Ministers, that he's not bringing razzmatazz, he's bringing substance. And that house building pledge you alluded to of trying to get up to 1.5 million over 5 years is exactly proof of that point. He's trying to be a serious Prime Minister and get elected and restore the trust of people in politics by getting stuff done.
Do you think then those discussions about whether or not he is the right man for the party are kind of going away? Because, you know, frankly, Sir Keir Starmer's doing so well in the polls. Because there was a stage and a lot of people just, you know, couldn't warm to him. A lot of the unions didn't like him. A lot of Labour voters just saying, is he the best we can come up with? But it sounds as though that debate's kind of going away and people are happy with him to be the next Labour Prime Minister if they win the next election.
Well, I think that debate went away a long time ago. He won the leadership fairly easily. But if you think about it, he's always looked at it in 2 or 3 stages of reforming the Labour Party, making it fit for government again and a stable place to be a member, holding the mirror up to Conservatives, showing what they're doing wrong, and then more of what we saw yesterday and this week, which is setting out what a Labour government would look like. So I think he's well on the way. And actually, the atmosphere, and I've been to, 10, 11, 12 Labour conferences, the atmosphere was very different. It was busier, not just members in a fairly good place, but also more journalists, more chief executive, more lobbyists, because they see Keir Starmer as a credible candidate to be Prime Minister. And also that wasn't the case under the previous leader.
OK, Henry Hill in the blue corner. Let's go over to you now. Starmer also had a pop at the Conservative Party, saying that you become a murky world of populism and conspiracy. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's nonsense. There's a really weird need on parts of all sides of British politics to pretend we're the United States, and the Republican Party in the United States, and indeed American politics in general, has got extremely ugly. And a lot of people who watched too much West Wing when they were younger kind of need to Photoshop themselves into that battle. So, Rishi Sunak's speech at party conference was deeply uninspiring in many ways, but it was a quite boring technocratic speech. I just want to come back on what we said. I haven't said that Sir Keir Starmer will destroy Britain or anything like that. I think that Labour are going to have a very difficult time in office if they do win next year, because they are going to inherit an extremely difficult fiscal situation, and that will be very difficult to manage. But I haven't said that they'll destroy the country. So I just want to clear that up.
Fair enough, and thank you for clarifying that. But I just want to push on his sort of appeal, I suppose, to voters on the right, but kind of centre-right. Because, you talk about the Americanisation of debate, but there are a lot of Tory voters, and I think of Rory Stewart posting last week about the Tory party conference, saying he almost felt as though it was designed to alienate the last remaining moderates in the party. And certainly Keir Starmer was identifying those in his speech yesterday, wasn't he, and trying to say, look, come and join us, which unprecedented, really, this idea of Labour stealing votes from the blue wall.
Yeah, well, the Conservatives have really built this rod for their own backs. If you look at the blue wall demographically, the average age, the blue wall is a load of Conservative seats in the south of England, which have been traditionally safe, but are now at risk. It's the analogue of the red wall. The average age in those seats is going down, despite the fact that we live in an ageing country, because London has got so unaffordable now that it is radiating angry voters into those old Shire heartlands. We saw Canterbury go a few years ago, and there are many other seats going that way. And also the Brexit debate, the fallout since Brexit has seen a realignment, and the same movement which has seen the Conservatives, at least a few years ago, become more attractive to working class voters in some parts of the country, has seen it alienate middle class voters in its traditional heartlands. And that does open up new opportunities for the Labour Party. The unfortunate thing for the Tories, of course, is that by the chaos over the last few years means that they now risk going into an election where neither side is happy with them. They have alienated those middle class voters, but they haven't done enough to make those voters who backed them for the first time in 2019 back them again.
OK, Henry Hill, Peter Edwards, we're going to have to leave it there. It seems the jury is still out on Keir Starmer.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's go through all the sports news this morning. Coity in the house.
Hello, I've got a few things to get through. I'll get through them as quickly as possible. Firstly, Euros. I think we all know that the Euros are now coming back. 2028. They made the announcement yesterday. Alexander Seferin, who is the president of UEFA, has to do the announcement. And often when you have these situations, it's like with the World Cup, you have lots of bidders, so they're all sitting in the room waiting. It's like the Oscars, but it's like the Oscars where only the winner is there because nobody else turns up, because we were the only ones that were actually in for it. So it is announced that it is going to be at UK and Ireland 2028.
Isn't that an interesting point, though? It's a bit like, has the Euro tournament become a bit like of a white elephant? Nobody really wants it. It costs a fortune to put on, you don't get your money back, and all the other countries have just dropped out. So have we just inherited this because no other country wants it?
It is said that, I mean, without sounding with my Liam Halligan hat on, the £2.6 billion boost to the economy once it actually comes. How that is going to work, I'm not exactly sure how they work that out. But this is the word. Yeah, that's just beer alone. But anyway, that's going to happen. So it's still great to have a tournament here. We do embrace sporting occasions. I honestly believe this more than any other country in the world. Well, we've had the athletics here. You get the Athletics World Championships. It's been around the world, not very well attended. We have it here. Everybody's there. Even baseball was here, completely sold out. So it's always great to have a sporting occasion.
At the Labour Party conference, they've been singing Things Going to Get Better, Don't Look Back in Anger, Common People. Harry Kane is coming out, and I can hear a distant rendition of It's Coming Home beginning, because he's saying that England are going to win the tournament on home soil to get rid of the ghosts of 96 and 2021. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he?
He would do.
Don't need a new song.
He is the Mandy Rice-Davis of the England football side. I mean, the thing is, he is the skipper, though, and he is going to say that. Of course, he's not going to go. So, Harry, what do you think, Euro 28? Well, I think we may get knocked out in the group stage. It's not going to happen, so of course he's going to say that, but we've got plenty of time. This is an interesting one that you may be interested in. UEFA, the other thing that they had in their meetings and announcements is that they did announced that they are not going to allow Russia to play in under-17 tournament. Whereas FIFA said that, yes, they thought this was going to be OK, that it's good for the future. It's nonsense. So finally, through pressure through every other country, UEFA have made the right
OK, Courtney, we're going to have to leave it there.
Okay.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. I just want to bring you up to date on some breaking news that we're getting from the Israel-Hamas conflict, but this time in relation to Lebanon. In the last few moments, we've been hearing via the Reuters news agency that Israeli military have experienced anti-tank fire against one of their northern positions. They say this has come from Lebanon. Now, of course, there have been concerns about the spread of this conflict into a wider regional crisis. Lebanon, of course, very much with Hezbollah there and their sort of philosophical links to Hamas and obviously links with Iran as well. And could this indeed become something of a proxy war? There will be concern about these reports of Israeli military saying anti-tank fire has been experienced against one of their northern positions, this time coming in from Lebanon. We're keeping a close eye on all of the images. You're seeing pictures there, though, of Gaza, and overnight and this morning you can see the smoke billowing out there, and the fire continues, it has to be said, on both sides, and serious questions this morning from the EU and the President of the United States overnight about what this means for civilians caught up in all of this. As I say, more later on the programme on that.
And still to come, according to a new study, the stress of renting ages you quicker than being jobless. That's next on Headline Makers.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamonn.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back, and joining us to go through some of the day's headlines now is journalist and broadcaster Andy Jones and former editor of the Daily Star and regular on this channel, fantastic Dawn Neeson. Top of the morning to you. So, going through the papers, Andy, shall we start with a reflection on some of the manifest front pages today of the unfolding horror, the emerging horror of what's happening on the ground in Israel?
You know, the videos, the stories, the social media that's coming in is absolutely horrifying. Stories of beheaded children, people dying in their beds, 260 revellers killed at a festival that was happening in the Desert of Peace, festival that's happening on the Gaza border, people in a kibbutz who are absolutely defenceless being killed. And again, this wasn't a political act by Hamas. This wasn't a military action. This was a desecration of innocent lives. This was an act of terror. And Netanyahu has left no doubt at all about that the pain for Hamas has only just begun. They will endure terrible things. The people of Palestine also caught in the middle. There are 2 million people under siege with dwindling food, fuel and medical supplies. And there is talk in the Times as well about how Hamas leaders, wherever they are, a lot of them aren't even based in Palestine, which is quite a bizarre thing, already regretting the kidnap of elderly women and children for the bad PR it's caused Hamas, which I'm not sure that was any surprise to anyone that they would get such bad PR.
Yeah. OK, well, let's turn our attention to other stories doing the rounds. And this is inside the Mail, Dawn. You've chosen a climate change story and how it could actually end up ruining the taste of beer.
This is actually the climate change story that makes everyone sit up and take notice.
Getting serious.
Just me. Exactly that, Martin.
Suddenly it's a thing for you, Martin.
Getting serious. Now, really all need to be doing much more about climate change. There's nothing like a cold beer on a warm day, but as climate change gathers pace, the rising global temperatures may mean your favourite Pilsner, Lager or Pale Ale becomes more expensive and less tasty.
Why? Well, because the hops?
Because it's affecting the crops. I mean, beer is the world's third most widely consumed beverage after water and tea.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know.
Yeah.
That's just Martin and me, by the way. I didn't know that at all. But the hop yield is basically not doing well because of the climate, and the yield is going down and the hops aren't as tasty.
But the good news is climate change is making wine growing in the UK.
Yes. It is.
Even better.
Yeah.
And as a non-beer-drinking wine lover, this is one climate change story that does worry me.
Well, there's the other story.
It's not all bad.
Not that we're obsessed with alcohol, but I think, come on, sometimes we need a drink, don't we?
Yeah.
The other story going around is that the French squeeze out the Italians to be the world's top wine producers. France benefits as extreme damp weather and the spread of mildew has wreaked havoc on Italy's grape crop.
I might be showing my ignorance, but I actually never had Italy as being the world's prime ahead of France. I know French are known for their champagne, but when it comes to wine, I always choose French over Italian.
They produce more. I put my foot in it this weekend. We were in a restaurant and they'd run out of French champagne. So I ordered a glass of English bubbly and I said, "Oh, this is lovely. I prefer it to the French stuff, but just don't tell the French that." And he goes, "I will not." It was French.
Oh, no!
And I was like, "I'm never going back to that restaurant." But English busy is good.
You offended the French girl, that even though.
That's why they're sending all the bed bugs over.
Yeah, in revenge for not liking their wine. Andy, this story, do the James Bond story, shall we?
Well, I was thinking the renting story first, and we'll come to James Bond later on if that's all right.
Sure.
And this is the idea that the stress of renting is actually biologically ageing us. I mean, I don't know if there's a bit of a correlation there or if it's just kind of conflating it. But anyway, tell us that story.
You're a homeowner. This is why you've got good skin. And I'm sort of half renting, half buying at the moment. And this is why I'm craggy. So a study of 1,500 people by BODS at University of Adelaide says renters accumulate biological damage on their body at a faster rate than people who own their own homes. And this is things like because of the stress, cortisol, etc. And because of things like rent increases, no-fault evictions, having to rely on your landlord to repair anything, and not being able to, anything from not being able to put your own pictures up because you're not allowed to damage the walls. This means, and the state of flux that renters are in, 9 million people rent in the UK, which is, I think, a record we've ever had. It means that they are acquiring biological damage, they say in the paper, at a faster rate than people who own their own home.
I wonder, Dawn, this might come as something as a surprise to people who own their homes, who are seeing their mortgage go through the roof, and they're worried about losing their homes. I mean,
some of us are slightly stressed about the mortgage going up. And, you know, a lot of people who are renting, who are having seen their rent increases, are because most of the very small landlords in this country, they only own 1 or 2 properties, they're having to put the rent up because their mortgages have gone up as well. It's pretty stressful around at the moment, isn't it?
Cost of living, nightmare.
Yeah.
But the idea that stress has some sort of biological ageing element is kind of interesting to hear. I definitely got my first grey hairs after having children. I'm pretty sure this job's taken a few years off me.
I'm actually really only 28. It's just work that's ageing me.
But, you know, it's not to be sniffed at, really. I mean, we gloss over it, but actually, you know, the young people are predominantly renters, and we talk about the astronomical increase in rents, not just in London, not just in cities, but in a lot of the towns around the country, up 25% on this time last year. And the percentage of people's salaries that's being spent on rental, the insecurity that comes with that, it is a worry.
It's not just the money either. It's the complete lack of control, the inability to be able to plan for the future. If you're being hit by mortgage rates or rent increases, you get a letter from your landlord, you get a letter from your mortgage lender, and suddenly you're absolutely terrified to open it.
Interesting how, before the end of the show, we're talking actually to some first-time voters, some young people. No doubt housing and the stress of that will be a huge issue for them. But, Andy, this is the story I wanted to cover. Everything in the world will be hokey-cokey if we only had a black or a woman 007.
Oh, sorry.
There were 2 stories. You've just actually seamlessly combined 2 stories.
Let's have a hokey-cokey first on James Bond. We've heard it for ages, haven't we? Idris Elba should be the next Bond. Let's have a she Bond, a Jane Bond. This story's been around forever. Why can't we just stick with the original, a fella?
Yeah, well, Daniel Craig's obviously departing as Bond, and John Taylor, who's been speaking at a lit festival, John Taylor used to work for the British government in Moscow. He says a black or female 007 would boost recruitment for MI6. I don't think intelligent people of colour who would be applying for these kind of jobs are seduced particularly because of whether James Bond is black or white. I think what is more seductive is having brilliant new dramas like Idris Elba's Luther, which I thought was brilliant, him in that lead role. Things like Killing Eve, where you had women in the roles as sort of assassin and thief catcher or whichever. Brilliant women of colour, brilliant actors of colour in new specific dramas rather than just getting fusty old Bond and changing the lead actor.
Are you calling Daniel Craig fusty old Bond?
Well, I don't know whether really young people who might be the MI6 stars of the future are particularly seduced by James Bond anymore. I think if you look at the figures of people going, it's people of my age.
I don't think it matters what colour James Bond is, but as long as he's got to be a bloke, he's got to be a proper alpha male bloke. I'm sorry, I don't think he can be a woman.
But are we reading into this that there is a recruitment problem into MI6? Are they struggling to attract people to be spies? And if so, why? You know, isn't it the ultimate dream of a lot of the brightest and best in this country to go out and spy
none of us
for us? I wouldn't include myself in that bracket.
There's your answer.
But, you know, it's sort of supposed to be a glamorous role, isn't it?
It never entered my mind, but, you know, from a working-class East End background, they weren't recruiting from my group of kids. They were recruiting from Oxbridge, weren't they? So
yeah, but I don't think they are anymore, necessarily. But they are. No. It's just interesting.
But isn't that the point? I'm not sure the pay at entry level is that great, and also I think a lot of the jobs are desk-bound, data trawling on social media and the internet, rather than sort of flying into glamorous five-star
from day one, going undercover in Cabana or whatever it might be.
It's an interesting point that you raised, Dawn, because there's never been a James Bond like, you know, where I come from in Nottinghamshire, the East Midlands. Never bothered me. We need a working-class Bond. No, we don't. James Bond is a sophisticated, debonair, upper crust, masculine, womanising, hard-drinking legend. And surely...
Actually making the job sound very attractive to me now. But no, it leaves the character alone. What's wrong with it?
I
Nothing.
agree.
100%.
Why should we rewrite it all?
Now, we do have the wokey-cokey now.
The wokey-cokey, yay.
This is another one of those crazy stories. A group of Morris dancers...
Yeah, I love this story. This
is
page 7 of The Sun. It's very funny. So this is the Brighton Morris dancing group that used to be called the Brighton Morris Men. But they've had a vote on the change of the name. So they dropped the word men so they can... And you know what's coming, don't you? So they can be more inclusive and include trans men and non-binary dancers into their largely male-presenting space. Right, there's still no room for women, though. You can't be a woman and go and dance for this Morris dancing group, but I could identify as a man and get in there, evidently.
I've seen loads of really good female Morris dancers.
But evidently
really
it's
superb ones.
It's a very male-dominated thing. It's meant to be about blokes, and women aren't meant to do it.
Do women want to do it, is my question. I mean, I was at a country, whatever you call it, village fete over the summer, talking about fusty old people. I mean, there were, you know, it was a particular type of person, and I thought, they look a bit... Sorry, I'm going to be offending some Morris dancers at home, but I did think, all right, go on.
It's a traditional...
It's a lovely tradition, but I've got no desire to get involved.
I can actually see you with those bells on your ankles, dancing around with a funny hat on. No offence, it's a great tradition, nothing wrong with it whatsoever, but, I mean, dropping the word men to be more inclusive, but you're still not including women. I mean, sorry.
If you are a woman and you would like to Morris dance and you are offended by the title of men in it, let us know. I personally am not convinced that many women are bothered about being included or not.
Have we got to the stage where the words men and women are now offensive?
Yeah, I think it is. And this idea of having, Morris transers. I mean, in terms of like a niche within a niche within a niche, how many trans Morris dancers do you even get?
Well, yeah, I mean, how many trans people want to go and be Morris dancers? I mean, really, it doesn't sound like the cool, edgy thing to do.
There's like 0.2% of the British population identify as trans, so what percentage of that then want to be a Morris dancer, which is already a very tiny minority of the population?
I can't imagine this Brighton Morris dancers group, their website's crashing with...
No. Maybe
well, you never know.
A GBNews investigation, and Isabel should go undercover in her local fate Morris dancing troupe.
How to be ostracised from my new local community.
I think you've
never invited back.
I think you've already got the Morris dancing fraternity out there ringing their bells in anger.
No,
Isabel.
I'm actually a bit afraid to look at the GBNews inbox now. I'm really sorry. I do love Morris dancing, and I would be sad to see it go. I just personally am not bothered about signing up
myself. We need a Morris dancing Bond. This is what...
combine it all.
That would be a proper spy role, because, you know, the suave
Well,
Bond
he'd give himself away all the time
undercover.
because of the bells. He wouldn't be able to creep up on anybody.
A transsexual Morris dancer of colour who's also in the Secret Service. There you go, every box ticked.
With an Aston Martin.
Yeah.
All right, well, listen, we have to say goodbye. Dawn Newsome, on that note, and Andy Jones, thank you for reviewing our papers this morning on what's been a pretty heavy news day. We've been able to find a bit of levity as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much indeed. Look, we're going to keep a close eye on all of those developments coming out of Israel this morning, getting that news of shots being fired from Lebanon. We'll have more detail also on the amassing of troops on the Gazan border, being confirmed this morning by the IDF. Details in just a second.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
the Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
A very good morning to you. It is coming up to 9 o'clock on Wednesday, the 11th of October. Welcome to Breakfast this morning with Isabel, Webster and Martin Daubney.
And these are stories we have been covering this morning, with the Israel and Hamas conflict dominating, of course, the programme.
Details about a massacre by Hamas have emerged. Reporters being shown the scene at an Israeli village where the bodies of men, women, children and babies have been found, according to the Israeli military. This is the reaction of the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, on our programme this morning.
Hamas behaviour, and we talked about these reports coming out of babies being butchered, bodies being beheaded. That has no place in the 21st century. That is at a different and completely different moral scale to a country defending itself.
And we're hearing that hundreds of thousands of Israeli troops near the Gaza border are now ready to launch a major ground offensive on the Gaza Strip. GB News reporter Charlie Peters is in Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv is now Israel's shelter as hundreds of thousands of troops head south to prepare for the next phase of their war with Hamas.
Well, all of that as the European Union condemns Israel's blockade of Gaza, saying the denial of food, water and electricity is illegal under international law.
And meanwhile, the Home Secretary ramps up security across the UK to protect Jewish communities from hate crime.
Elsewhere, Sir Keir Starmer took to the stage at the Labour Party conference in his pitch for power, promising to get Britain's future back. This comes as a protester sprinkled the leader with glitter during his speech.
And just how did the Labour leader's speech go down with our panel of first-time voters? We'll be getting their views on Labour's policies later in the show.
And, of course, we'll be hearing from Aidan McGivern from the Met Office with your weather.
It's a reversal of fortunes for much of the UK in today's weather. Brighter skies for Scotland, but wetter conditions for Wales and central England. Full details in the forecast.
Well, as always, we love to hear from you throughout the course of the programme. Keep your thoughts coming in. You can join those discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet us @gbnews.
On day 5 of Israel's war on Hamas, shocking details have emerged of a massacre during the terror group's assault on Israeli communities. Reporters have been shown the scene of a massacre at a village close to Gaza.
Just a warning, first of all, you may find many of the images we're about to show you disturbing. This is the village of Kfar Aza. It's a kibbutz, where the military told reporters yesterday that men, women and children had been shot dead by Hamas terrorists.
And the military told reporters that entire families were found dead in their homes, including babies.
Well, Israel's bombing campaign on Gaza has continued this morning, and Hamas have also been firing rockets into Israel.
More than 200 buildings were destroyed overnight. The United Nations reports 260,000 civilians have been displaced and that entire neighbourhoods have been destroyed. Meanwhile, Hamas has continued to fire rockets into Israel.
Well, casualty numbers are mounting on both sides as Israel put their death toll at 1,200. And the Gaza Health Ministry have reported at least 900 people have been killed in the airstrikes.
And a Palestinian official has said Gaza's sole power plant has fuel for just another 12 hours left now. After a European meeting last night, the EU foreign policy chief said he opposed the blockade of Gaza.
Israel has the right to defend, but it has to be done accordingly with international law, humanitarian law. And some decisions are counter this international law. The Palestinian Authority is our partner. We don't deal with Hamas, but yes, we support and we deal and we work together with the Palestinian Authority. And not all the Palestinian people are terrorists. So a collective punishment against all Palestinians will be unfair and unproductive.
Well, we were the first broadcasters this morning to speak to the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps about the escalations in the Israel-Hamas conflict. And we started by asking how concerned he is about the Palestinian civilians in Gaza.
Hamas behaviour, and we talked about these reports coming out of babies being butchered, bodies being beheaded. That has no place in the 21st century. That is at a different and completely different moral scale to a country defending itself, typically trying to give notice before, for example, a building is hit, what they call knock and drop, so there's actually opportunity for people to get out. That is completely different to what these terrorists and Hamas are doing. But the responsibility lies fairly and squarely with Hamas in a situation like this. And I don't think there should be any question of trying to make sort of moral equivalence between Israel trying to defend itself and the way that Hamas have gone around butchering people.
And the Israeli military says hundreds of thousands of troops are near the Gaza border and are now ready to begin their mission.
Well, Israel's expected to launch a ground offensive on the Gaza Strip soon. And this morning, the Israeli Defence Force spokesperson, Jonathan Conricus, issued his daily update.
What we're also doing in these areas close to the Gaza Strip is that we have deployed, or actually we have sent our infantry, armored soldiers, our artillery corps, and many other soldiers from the reserves, 300,000 in numbers, in different brigades and divisions, and they are now close to the Gaza Strip, getting ready to execute the mission that they have been given, that we have been given by the Israeli government, and that is to make sure that Hamas, at the end of this war, won't have any military capabilities by which they can threaten or kill Israeli civilians. That is our military aim.
And the UK and the United States have offered their full support to Israel to contain Hamas. The first plane load of ammunition from America has just landed in Israel.
Well, let's speak to GB News reporter Charlie Peters, who's in Tel Aviv for us. Charlie, is it fair to say that there's a real concern that this could spread into a much wider conflict? Not only are we hearing about the troops, possibly a land invasion, already the Israelis calling this a war, but this morning the IDF reporting that they'd had anti-tank fire coming into their northern positions in from Lebanon, which, of course, I mean, suggestions that could involve Hezbollah, a widening of the conflict there. And then this morning, just in the last few moments, we're hearing, for example, that the Netherlands have advised their citizens to avoid all but essential travel to Lebanon. So it seems like regional insecurity is certainly spreading.
That's right, and there is an atmosphere of terror among the civilians I've spoken to this morning in Tel Aviv. And when they talk about how they feel about this situation, they do refer to the fact that this war is complex, that it has multiple fronts. I've just referenced the missile coming in from Lebanon this morning that follows several border clashes with what is likely to be Lebanese Hezbollah, but also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad forces in southern Lebanon. And overnight we had reports of shelling coming in from Syria, a new front into this conflict. The Israeli side fired back with artillery. Now, this morning, the US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said that the US was working hard to secure safe passage with Gaza into Egypt, so that Gazans currently being hit by Israeli airstrikes in the Gaza Strip could escape from the Israelis targeting Hamas militants and terrorists in the area. However, last night, as you've said, the Americans did support their first supply of advanced munitions to the Israeli Defense Forces. And the Israelis accepted these munitions, saying that they would be vital in the next phase of their mission. This is likely to be the decisive phase, and we will see what is almost certain to be the first invasion of the Gaza Strip since 2014. Significantly more amounts of bloodshed to come after what has already been a devastating war in just 5 days.
OK, Charlie Peters, thanks for that update. And news in that the USA is now trying to negotiate with Israel and Gaza to get a humanitarian corridor for civilians out of Gaza, possibly into Egypt. These talks are still underway. This is not confirmed, but hope in sight that there may be some form of evacuation from the area.
And these are the latest pictures coming into us again from the Reuters news agency this morning of the civilian implications, frankly, in Gaza. And that's why a lot of the international community have been renewing their concerns about that humanitarian corridor potentially out of the country. President Biden echoing it, and we heard just a few moments ago, real worries about the siege and the implications there to cut off supplies, especially as we're hearing that energy supplies are running loose. But just to explain what we're seeing there in terms of the pictures, a father is carrying his daughter into an ambulance, and it's understood that he has been saying to her, don't be scared, and he's comforting her following on from an Israeli airstrike. The Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, talking about this knock and drop system that they have in the country, which enables civilians in theory to get out before those bombs land on the ground, but in practice, in such a small space, that is obviously incredibly difficult to achieve. And with 900 civilians having lost their lives so far, it is a nightmare situation on both sides. With
a major ground offensive on the way, that can only get worse. OK, well, here there are worries the conflict could lead to a rise of anti-Semitism back here in the UK.
Yeah, Jewish schools are increasing security and communities are supporting one another as they wait to hear if friends and family caught up in the conflict are safe.
Let's speak to the Chief Executive of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, Gideon Falter. Thanks for joining us this morning, Gideon, on GB News. So we've seen what appear to be very pro-Hamas, quite blatant protests or celebrations happening across the UK, lots of them in London. We've seen businesses targeted, vandalised in Golders Green, graffiti on the streets. How do you feel in terms of the safety of the Jewish community in Britain and the alarming rise in anti-Semitism?
Campaign against anti-Semitism, it's a little bit like a fire hose has suddenly been trained on us. We've got this vast number of reports of incidents, and particularly, as you mentioned, there are people on the streets of Britain who are openly praising a banned terrorist group. And to everyone who does that, a reminder that that is a criminal offence, it's a terrorist offence. But so far, we need to see action being taken, including these people who are praising Hamas on social media. And we aren't seeing so far the prosecutions emerging, and we need to see those come through very urgently. Otherwise, these people are just going to get bolder and bolder.
So many Jewish citizens living in the UK in some way feel affected by what's happened, whether they've got people who have been called up as reservists, whether they have family or friends, whether they were visiting, because we know there was a religious holiday going on. How important...
Sorry, I seem to have lost sound.
Ah, OK, that's a problem. We were just hoping to ask you a little bit about the support that we've seen from the Prime Minister for the Jewish community in this country. If we can re-establish that link, we will try and come back to him just as soon as we can. In the meantime, it's worth just reflecting, really, what he was talking about, the scenes outside the Israeli embassy over the last couple of days where they're having to board it up in light of those protests. In theory, they were protests in support of Palestinians, but it sort of was a very fine line between celebration for the attacks on Israel and indeed for the terrorist organisation Hamas. Either way, it was felt to be highly inappropriate in the wake of what have frankly been massacres of innocents in the region.
I think we have Gideon back now. Gideon, can you hear us? Have we re-established comms with you? You have. We have you back. OK, so you were just outlining the fact that even though it is illegal to protest in favour of groups like Hamas, and we've seen actually in France the police going in and breaking up such protests, in the UK there doesn't seem to be any firm action, just lots of talk.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know, we always get, as the Jewish community, we always end up with reassurances from politicians and police forces, and no doubt they have good intentions. But when it comes to actually dealing with these things, we've learned from long experience that unfortunately those reassurances don't come through. And just imagine what it's like to be in the Jewish community just now. You've just had the single largest loss of Jewish life on a day since the Holocaust. Everybody in the community, and there aren't that many Jews in the world, there are about 14, 15 million of us, and everybody knows somebody who is in some way affected by this. It's a deeply shocking thing that's happened to not just Israeli Jews, but Jews right around the world. And we're seeing people outside on our streets dancing and clapping and waving. And these people need to be dealt with by the police, particularly if they're committing terrorism offences. What's the point in having terrorism legislation if we just bother to enforce it?
Gideon, I have to ask you this because, you know, some of those that perhaps were taken to the streets may be related in this country to civilians that have been caught up since Saturday's horrendous terrorist atrocities, and there will be hurt on both sides. Do you recognise at all any of those, you know, feelings on the other side, and do you support the calls for a humanitarian corridor for civilians that are being used very often as human shields in the Gaza Strip so that they can get to safety if they choose to do so?
Okay, so first of all, I'm here from Campaign Against Antisemitism. I'm not here from the Israeli government, and I've got no... it's wrong to ask me about...
Well, no, the reason I ask you is that because there might be people taking to the streets in those protests which you were commenting on. So if there are people who are coming out in the UK personally being affected in the way that you say many Jews have been personally affected, there will be people in this country. I think of the leader of the SNP who has family in Palestine. You know, there are people on both sides in this country. Absolutely hear what you're saying. You're not representing the Israeli government. But do you recognise that there is a need for civilians to be given an exit route from the Gaza Strip? It's just a general question.
Right. Well, the general question is, do I recognise that there are civilians affected on both sides? Of course I do. I think what's very important to recognise is that the civilians affected on the Israeli side, we've seen babies beheaded. We have seen people in the most gruesome way attacked by a terrorist organisation. And Israel, as a sovereign country, obviously has to defend its population. And unfortunately, when war is invited, if you just think a week back, there were negotiations happening about, I don't know, more work permits for people exiting Gaza. This was not a fierce situation of war. This was a situation of relative calm. Hamas has unleashed an absolutely horrendous terrorist assault. And I'm afraid to say that the people who are on the streets in London, no matter what personal connections they might have anywhere in the world to any civilians being harmed anywhere, there is absolutely not a thing in the world that can justify the kind of barbarity that we have seen from Hamas. And anybody celebrating that or promoting Hamas or supporting or glorifying Hamas belongs in a prison cell. The law must be enforced.
OK, Gideon Folser, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us this morning on Breakfast.
Stay with us after the break. We'll be speaking to our first-time voters. We spoke to them last week after the Conservative Party conference and Rishi Sunak's big speech. We'll be finding out what they made of Sir Keir Starmer yesterday and everything that's been happening in Liverpool this week. See you in a sec.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamonn.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We're going to take you straight to our first-time voters panel. We had some of them in last week reflecting on what the Conservative Party was saying. And this morning we welcome Ricardo, Izzy and Amber to reflect on what you've been hearing from Liverpool. And Ricardo is an old-timer now, having done this once before. First of all, your thoughts then on what you've been hearing and if any of it resonated with you, because last week you raised your hand to say nothing you heard from the Conservatives would persuade you to vote for them after last week.
Well, look, Labour have put in some good points, but I do feel like they're the alternative to the Conservatives. Everyone's just voting for them because they want to get the Conservatives out. So they, in terms of home ownership, for example, they say they want to build 1.5 million new homes, but they haven't really said how they're going to do it. So I would like to hear more on the actual strategy, and because I don't think it's enough right now.
And do you think that point of being able to own your own home is something that's key? Because we had a report here that renting is bad for your mental health. It actually is ageing. So what about yourself? Is that prospect of being able to own a home something that Keir Starmer, that appeals to you?
Yeah, I think it's important to own a home because renting, it causes so much pressure on young people to keep up with it and to make sure that they pay the right amount they need to pay. So owning a home will do them justice.
And Izzy, you're 17. You haven't yet been eligible to vote. Potentially by the end of next year, you would be the right age for it. Do you feel as though the Labour Party is the party then that will possibly make home ownership a reality for you, based on what you've heard the last few days? Or do you think it's just perhaps, you know, never going to be achievable? And do you feel despondent about that?
I do think it can be achievable, I do. But I do think that the Conservative Party have made it quite difficult for them to do that.
And your mum's a nurse, I believe.
She is, yeah.
Just give us a sense of how she has felt life has been through this cost of living crisis, through the pandemic, but under the stewardship of the Conservatives.
I think it was quite difficult for her in the pandemic to deal with all that stress. And she had to take in a lot of information, and my dad helped her throughout all of it, but it was very difficult for her in that time.
I'm sure, yeah.
And Amber, when I come on to you now, one thing that was spoken about at the conference was misogyny. I think we have a clip of Angela Rayner talking about it. We'll come back to your take on that, could we?
Sure. It's an honour to stand here today as your deputy leader and look out at so many inspiring women. And let's face it, sometimes it's tiring being a woman in this world, especially under a Tory government. But that is why it falls upon us to continue the work of the last Labour government, standing side by side so that all of us succeed in battling inequality together. Labour will properly tackle sexual harassment at work. A shocking 2/3 of young women have been sexually harassed at work. This must change. That's why the next Labour government will amend the Equalities Act to introduce a legal duty for employers to take all reasonable steps to stop sexual harassment before it starts. But that's not all. We will make...
So Amber, when you hear Angela Rayner talk like that about misogyny and a country fit for women, how does that make you feel? Is that the sort of language you want to hear from Labour?
Yeah, I would say it is. I think sexual harassment and that kind of thing is, a very big issue. And, what she was mentioning about trying to, prevent that, in working environments and stuff, I think that's really important.
You're 23, you've never voted in an election before, which will, a lot of people will be sad to hear that. Do you feel inspired to vote next time, your vote might count?
I think so, yeah. I feel based on what I've heard, I think it is inspiring, and I think definitely that we are getting to that point where, there needs to be a change, there needs to be, yeah.
Well, there's always the big question about whether politicians turn people off politics, and the young in particular. And I just want to show you some karaoke from conference last night where one of the shadow cabinet was dancing. Let's take a look, first of all. I was looking for Tom Harwood in there, but I couldn't see him, and we know he was there burning the midnight oil. I have to just do a show of hands, because that's how we wrapped up the People's Panel last week.
Yeah.
Anything that you've seen over the last 3 days that could persuade you three to vote for the Labour Party? If so, raise your hands.
Well,
OK, one sort of hesitant, 1.5.
There's good points, but they just still need to do so much work. They definitely kind of... A lot of young people are definitely interested more in the Labour Party. That's how I feel, but...
Even after that singing?
Yeah, it's a bit terrible.
Well, listen, Ricardo, Izzy, Amber, fascinating to get your thoughts. Thanks for taking the time to come in and review Labour Party conference with us. Thank you to you for joining me this morning, and for everybody at home. We've had a lovely morning. We hope you have too. And do stay tuned. Britain's Newsroom's next.
Thank you. Well done, guys.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country.
only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen.